Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this What If story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭𝐚𝐢𝐥𝐬 on Wattpad. Now let's start. As soon as Izuku woke up, he immediately ran to his calendar, filled with excitement. It was his birthday. He dashed to his parents' room, jumping in anticipation. After a few attempts, he managed to grab the handle and open the door. Bursting into their room, he clambered onto their bed and began bouncing. Soon, he heard his parents groan, and his mother started to sit up. She asked what he was doing up, and he stopped bouncing, plopping down on his dad. His dad groaned and pushed him off, prompting Izuku to shout that it was his birthday. He jumped back onto his dad, and his mother chuckled, telling Hisashi to get up since Izuku wouldn't stop until he did. With a groggy expression, Hisashi sat up and asked if Izuku was excited to find out what his quirk would be. Izuku nodded vigorously. Hisashi sighed, stood up, and walked to his closet, saying that since everyone was awake, they could go to the doctor's. Izuku's face lit up with a smile as he jumped off the bed and ran to his room, imagining the possibilities of his quirk. As they drove to the doctor's office, Izuku wondered if he would get a quirk like 𝐾𝐿 or perhaps a mental-type quirk. He thought about how amazing it would be to have an emitter-type quirk or even a strength-type quirk like 𝐼𝐼𝐻𝐽. After the examination, the doctor delivered unexpected news. He informed 𝐒𝐮𝐬 and Hisashi that Izuku would not gain a quirk, leaving them in shock. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 struggled to comprehend the situation, while Hisashi expressed his frustration, calling Izuku useless. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 sighed, feeling equally lost. Hisashi then proposed a drastic idea, to kidnap Izuku and find a group of villains to help. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 was taken aback but eventually asked how they would find such a group. Hisashi, determined, left the room to make a call. When he returned, he had a smirk on his face, revealing that a friend could arrange for a group called the League of Villains to come and take Izuku. Excited by the plan, 𝐒𝐮𝐬 gathered their things and rushed to find Izuku. She told him they were going to the park to meet up with Mitsuki and Katsuki, which made Izuku smile as they headed out together. At the park, Izuku looked up at his parents, asking where 𝐾𝐿 and Aunt Mitsuki were. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 reassured him they would arrive soon, but she began to worry when they were late. Hisashi, trying to lighten the mood, suggested they get ice cream. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 agreed, asking Izuku what flavor he wanted. He excitedly replied that he wanted vanilla, like 𝐾𝐿's hair. As his parents left to get ice cream, Izuku felt a shiver run down his spine. He sensed someone nearby and turned around, only to see a shadow growing on the ground. Before he could react, a wet cloth covered his mouth and nose. He realized it was chloroform and tried to hold his breath, but it was too late. Darkness enveloped him. The next day, Izuku awoke, disoriented and questioning where he was. As he opened his eyes, he heard whispering nearby. One voice wondered why their 𝐼𝐻𝐻𝐿 had taken him, while another responded that they didn't know what their leader was thinking. Suddenly, the second voice announced that the kid was finally awake. As Izuku looked up, he saw a shadow looming over him. Hesitantly, he gazed up to find a red-haired boy with small burn marks on his face and arms, wearing a small smile. "What do you want from me?" the child whispered, fear evident in his voice. The boy with light blue hair sighed, scratching his neck. He explained that they technically didn't want anything from him, but an acquaintance of his parents had insisted that they take him. He continued, expressing his disdain for the situation, admitting that he would prefer to eliminate the child to avoid wasting resources on someone he deemed unworthy. The child flinched, shaking in the chair, and managed to stutter an understanding. The redhead in the room growled, reminding the blue-haired boy about the rules against violence while stepping back, causing the child to tremble a little less. After a while, the blue-haired teen left, leaving the redhead alone with Izuku. The redhead, whose name was 𝐼𝐻𝐽, acknowledged the child's situation, explaining that Shigaraki's dislike for him stemmed from jealousy over attention. He assured Izuku that he wasn't a bad kid and that there was no need to worry about him. 𝐼𝐻𝐽 introduced himself, though he admitted it wasn't his real name, and explained that the cell would likely be his new home for a while. He encouraged Izuku to stay safe and promised to return later with someone else before leaving the room. Izuku spent the next 2 days in the cell, receiving only the bare minimum of food and water to keep him alive. When Tomura received the call from 𝐼𝐼𝐻 about the mission to kidnap a child, he felt indifferent, viewing it as a simple task. He waited at the park for the child's parents to leave, then approached from behind, using a chloroform rag to render the child unconscious. With a press of a button given to him by 𝐼𝐻𝐬, they were transported to the base. Unsure of what to do next, he allowed 𝐼𝐻𝐬 to take charge. When the child woke up, 𝗟𝗶𝐻 stepped in front of Tomura, preventing him from getting too close. Frustrated, Tomura left the room, only to be met by 𝐼𝐻𝐬 asking if the child was dead. Tomura growled in response, irritated by 𝗟𝗶𝐻's interference. After a tense hour of training, Tomura reluctantly decided the child could live, though he still viewed him as worthless. He ordered 𝐼𝐻𝐬 to get the child something to eat before retreating to his room. During that hour, 𝗟𝗶𝐻 felt a strong urge to help the child, who reminded him of his little brother. He was relieved when Tomura allowed the child to live. Once Tomura was out of sight, 𝗟𝗶𝐻 instructed 𝐼𝐻𝐬 to fetch a first aid kit so he could tend to the child's wounds without fear of being caught by Shigaraki. Once in his room, 𝗟𝗶𝐻 approached the child, reassuring him that everything would be all right and expressing his sorrow for what the child was enduring due to his lack of a quirk. After carefully disinfecting and bandaging the child's wounds, 𝗟𝗶𝐻 helped him drink some water, though the child winced in pain when lifted. 𝗟𝗶𝐻 promised him that he would get food and help him back to his room. As he set the child down on the small bed, 𝗟𝗶𝐻 assured him that he and 𝐼𝐻𝐬 would bring him food every day until Shigaraki left. The child sniffled and nodded in response. 𝗟𝗶𝐻 smiled, hugged him gently, and said goodbye before leaving the bar, feeling a wave of concern for the child as he returned home. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 entered the child's room to find him sitting with a frown and tears on his cheeks. He sat beside the child, offering comfort and explaining that he and 𝗟𝗶𝐻 would try to help him. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 introduced himself, encouraging the child to call him 𝗍𝗍 or 𝗂𝐻, while cautioning him to avoid acknowledging him in front of Shigaraki to prevent any misunderstandings. He offered a small hug, trying to provide some solace in the difficult circumstances. The child quietly cried into the embrace, and though it pained me, I remained silent, allowing him to release his emotions into my vest. The thought of his parents filled me with anger. How could they hurt such a sweet child? I sighed, rubbing his back as his cries gradually softened into whimpers, eventually leading him to drift off to sleep. Carefully, I peeled his hand from my vest and laid him down on the small bed, tucking him in with a blanket that barely covered him. I whispered an apology and stepped out of the room, locking the door behind me. With a deep breath, I adjusted my appearance and headed toward the lobby, ready to check on the young 𝐿. For the next few weeks, 𝐼𝐻𝐬 and I helped the child bandage his wounds from Shigaraki. As I wrapped up a particularly nasty cut on his arm, 𝐼𝐻𝐬 suggested taking Izuku to the park to help him relax. I smiled at both of them and asked Izuku if he wanted to go. He hesitantly nodded, and we finished bandaging him before I helped him stand and lifted him onto my back. I felt a smile spread across my face as he chuckled, and I carefully walked out the door, mindful of his injuries. Once we reached the park, I set Izuku down and let him choose what he wanted to do. He shyly asked if he could go on the swings, and I happily took his hand, guiding him to the shortest swing. I asked how he was feeling and he replied that he was doing better, thanks to 𝐼𝐻𝐬 and me. Encouraged by his calmer voice, I suggested getting ice cream, promising to hold his hand the entire time, especially since his parents had left him under the pretense of getting ice cream. Izuku nodded eagerly, and we walked down the street together, enjoying our treats before heading back to the base. When 𝗟𝗶𝐻 and Izuku returned, they both had ice cream in hand. I smiled at Izuku and signaled to 𝗟𝗶𝐻 that the young 𝐿 was in his room. 𝗟𝗶𝐻 knelt beside Izuku, explaining that he needed to take the rest of the ice cream because Shigaraki was nearby. Izuku, wide-eyed, handed over the ice cream and took my hand as I led him to his room. I reassured him that the young 𝗚 wouldn't hurt him right now. After I opened the door for him, he said goodbye, and I closed it behind him. Returning to the bar room, I noticed 𝗟𝗶𝐻 and the young 𝗚 engaged in conversation. The young 𝐒𝐮𝐲𝐿 asked 𝐼𝐷 if he ever considered faking his death to escape his home. I interjected, reminding the young 𝐒𝐮𝐲𝐿 not to scratch his neck, as it could cause harm. I then asked 𝐼𝐷 if it was time for him to head home, noting that he had already been there for 6 hours. He groaned but nodded, leaving the room. I assumed he was going to say goodbye to Izuku, so I made sure the young 𝐒𝐮𝐲𝐿 stayed put until I felt a buzz on my phone, indicating 𝐼𝐷 had left. Once I confirmed that no liquor was missing from the cabinet, I returned to the bar room only to find the young 𝐒𝐮𝐲𝐿 had disappeared. Concerned, I headed to Izuku's room and found it empty. Realizing the young 𝐒𝐮𝐲𝐿 must have found him, I groaned but quickly composed myself and walked into the gym. There, I witnessed Izuku on the ground, taking hits during what was supposed to be training. My heart sank at the sight of him being kicked repeatedly. Just as Izuku managed to stand and retaliate with a kick, the young 𝐒𝐮𝐲𝐿 reacted angrily, preparing to strike back. Anticipating the worst, I created a warp gate to redirect the young 𝐒𝐮𝐷R's hand, preventing it from hitting Izuku. The young 𝐒𝐮𝐲𝐿 erupted in frustration, but after a moment, I was able to calm him down, though he stormed off to his room afterward. I approached Izuku, who was visibly shaken. I apologized, explaining that I hadn't expected this to happen. He rushed to me, crying and hugging me tightly. I assured him it would be okay as I helped clean him up and tended to his clothes. Afterward, I promised to make him some soup before bed and asked him to wait in his room for a bit. He nodded and went to his room while I prepared his meal. Once he finished eating, he went to bed. After making dinner for the young 𝐒𝐮𝐲𝐿 and delivering it to his room, I washed the dishes and felt a sense of accomplishment. With everything done, I smiled and walked into the hallway, wishing good night to both Izuku and the young 𝐒𝐮𝐿 before heading to my own room, looking forward to a well-deserved rest. It had already been 5 years since Izuku had been taken by Shigaraki, and he had certainly improved in many ways. He had developed a high pain tolerance due to Shigaraki's training. Fortunately, 𝐼𝐷 and Kurojirai had been there to support him during those years. Around the 4-year mark, 𝐼𝐷 had faked his death and started living at the base, which brought Izuku some happiness, although he couldn't openly express it. He still resided in the same room he had when he first arrived. By the time Izuku's 9th birthday came around, the only thing he received from Shigaraki were more cuts and bruises. However, Kurojirai and 𝐼𝐷 had given him a scarf, a new pillow, and a blanket. Izuku smiled at them, grateful for the gifts, especially since his old pillow and blanket barely fit him anymore. During those 5 years, Shigaraki had trained Izuku to the point where he was terrified of him. By the 1-year mark, Izuku had learned to endure the pain, and by the 3rd year, he had developed a toned physique from the rigorous training and harsh treatment. With 𝐼𝐷's arrival on the 4th year, Izuku had become even more isolated, as Shigaraki had installed cameras around the base to prevent his escape, which hindered the support 𝐼𝐷 and Kurojirai could provide. By the 5-year mark, Izuku had become as obedient as a frightened dog to its abusive owner, but he could be himself when Shigaraki left the base, allowing him to spend time with his 2 friends. Today felt like any other day. After enduring Shigaraki's so-called endurance training, Izuku was left with 𝐼𝐷, who helped bandage his wounds. Kurojirai floated into the room and asked if Izuku was okay. Izuku looked up, nodded with a small smile, and sighed as he gazed at the ground. He mentioned that his pain tolerance had become so high that it felt almost like a quirk. The thought of having a quirk seemed like a distant dream, and he expressed his frustration at still being quirkless. 𝐼𝐷, amused by Izuku's antics, shared some good news. A girl around Izuku's age had arrived at the base the previous day, seeking to join them. Initially, Shigaraki had been against it, but after hearing about her quirk and habits, he had allowed her to stay. She was currently in the training room, examining the knives. Excited at the prospect of meeting someone his age, Izuku asked if he could go meet her. 𝐼𝐷 smiled and encouraged him to go. Izuku's smile widened as he stood up and rushed to the training room, ignoring his wounds. As he opened the door, a knife flew past his head, and he dodged just in time. However, he quickly forgot about the near miss, overwhelmed with joy at seeing another person his age. He introduced himself as Izuku and asked for her name. The girl, initially shocked by his friendliness, introduced herself as 𝐒𝐮𝐽𝐻𝐸 and expressed her pleasure in meeting him. Izuku suggested she call him Izuku-kun, and she giggled at the nickname, appearing more relaxed. Curious about her quirk, Izuku eagerly asked what it was. Toga hesitated, mumbling something he couldn't hear. When he reassured her that he wouldn't judge her, she revealed that her quirk was transformation, which required her to drink BLD to change into someone else, with the duration depending on the amount consumed. Izuku smiled widely, pleased to meet her, and requested that she not acknowledge him as a friend in front of Shigaraki for their safety. Toga seemed confused but nodded in understanding. After thanking her, Izuku left the training room, said goodnight to 𝐷𝐵 and Kurojirai, and retired to his room, where 𝐷𝐵 locked the door for the night. Meanwhile, Aizawa was feeling the strain of his new role as a hero. He had received a late-night call about suspicious activity at an abandoned building, prompting him to investigate. As he broke a door handle and entered the building, he was shocked to find a child locked in a cage. Alarmed, he quickly picked the lock and freed the boy, who woke up and instinctively defended himself. Aizawa calmed the child, introducing himself as a pro-hero there to help him. The boy, initially skeptical, became excited when Aizawa showed him his hero license. He informed Aizawa about the cameras around the building but assured him he knew how to avoid them. After the boy led the way, they managed to escape the building. Once outside, Aizawa picked him up and ran to the police station. Upon arrival, he presented his license and asked for Detective Tsukachi, who appeared almost immediately, astonished to see the child in Aizawa's arms. Tsukachi asked the boy for his name so they could locate his parents, and Aizawa sat him down in a chair, ready to help. It had been 4 years since Shota, known as Eraserhead, and Yamada, also called Present Mike, had adopted Izuku Midoriya, who now went by the name Yamazawa. Izuku was now 13 and in his last year of middle school. However, he held a secret that no one knew about. He was a vigilante known as the Black Fox. Not many people were aware of his alter ego, and that was exactly how he wanted to keep it. One day, Izuku expressed his feelings about his past. He had endured a difficult childhood, feeling abandoned by his parents due to their role in his kidnapping at the age of 4. He had chosen to renounce his last name, leaving him without one. When he learned he would be going with a pro-hero, he felt a sense of relief, especially since he only knew one pro-hero at that moment. His memories were a bit hazy, but he hoped they would return soon. As he spoke, the person listening couldn't help but be taken aback by Izuku's eloquence. They exchanged a glance, and the listener nodded in agreement, deciding that Izuku could stay with Eraserhead for the time being. They also mentioned that Izuku would need to come in the next day to answer some questions, to which Izuku agreed. With a gentle gesture, he reached out, and the listener picked him up, placing him on their back. Before they reached home, the listener mentioned having a rather loud boyfriend, to which Izuku simply nodded, a small smile forming on his face. When they arrived home, Izuku had already fallen asleep on the listener's back. The listener carefully laid him down on the couch and settled at its foot, eventually succumbing to sleep themselves. Unbeknownst to them, the loud blonde boyfriend had been watching the entire encounter, recording it while whispering to himself about how adorable it was. At that moment, Izuku was running away from 𝗟𝗏, who was shouting in frustration. Izuku thought to himself that 𝗟𝗏 had some serious issues. He had only saved him from being attacked by someone with a water quirk, and now the hero was angry that a vigilante had come to his aid. Izuku couldn't help but call out that he had a name, Black Fox, as he continued to flee from the fiery hero. After a few more minutes of evading 𝗟𝗏, Izuku found himself in a tight spot, cornered in an alleyway. He muttered to himself that things couldn't possibly get worse, but as he turned around, he saw a flaming fist coming right at him. He dodged just in time, but not before something hard struck his ribs, causing him to taste BLD. Despite the pain, he managed to joke about 𝗟𝗏's strength, but another kick landed in his stomach, forcing him to cough up more BLD. He wiped his mouth with his sleeve, still managing a smirk, knowing how dangerous 𝗟𝗏 could be when enraged. 𝗟𝗏, in his blind fury, began to punch and kick wildly, only to realize he had been attacking a plastic trash bag instead. Izuku couldn't help but snicker at the scene before slipping back into the shadows. As 𝗟𝗏 continued to shout for him, Izuku took the opportunity to escape, running as fast as he could. After a few minutes, he found himself on top of a building, trying to catch his breath before heading home to clean up. He reflected on how much 𝗟𝗃 seemed to dislike him. Later, in the early hours of the morning, Hitoshi sat up in bed, trying to steady his breathing after a nightmare. He reminded himself that he was safe now. After putting on some shorts, he walked into the hallway and heard a crash outside. Rushing to the door, he was surprised to find his brother Izuku on the ground, looking worse for wear with a bloody nose and burns covering his body. Izuku stuttered a greeting, but Hitoshi was too exasperated to respond immediately. He scolded Izuku for getting into trouble again, listening as his brother explained how he had saved 𝗟𝗃 from an attack, only to end up in a fight with him. Hitoshi motioned for Izuku to come inside, dragging him to his room to tend to his injuries. He instructed Izuku to take off his suit and began cleaning his wounds, applying burn cream and giving him instructions on how to care for them. After ensuring Izuku was settled, Hitoshi reluctantly returned to his own room, hoping to get some sleep. The next morning, Izuku groaned as he woke up to his father calling for him repeatedly. After a brief moment of chaos, he managed to get ready for the day, applying burn cream and fixing his hair before heading downstairs. There, he joined Hitoshi, Aizawa, and present Mike for breakfast. Aizawa asked if Izuku was excited about trying for you in a few months, and Izuku expressed his enthusiasm. Hitoshi, however, voiced his concerns about the flawed system, mentioning his discussions with Nizu about creating a new exam for students with mental-type quirks. After finishing breakfast, the brothers made their way to school, slipping into the shadows to avoid drawing attention. They entered their classroom quietly and took their seats at the back. When attendance was called, they reluctantly responded, drawing the gaze of their classmates, who silently judged them. The teacher continued with the lesson, and they settled into the routine, accustomed to the scrutiny. Used to the continuous mocking, the constant staring, the endless judging, and even the frightened looks that Toshi received, they had learned to navigate their environment. They were raised in a supportive atmosphere, where they were taught to be strong. Even when they acted scared, they were really just trying their best to avoid confrontation. It was about letting people think they were weak. When school ended, Toshi and his friend attempted to leave the school grounds but were cornered by Bakugo and his group. Bakugo sneered at them, tauntingly asking where they thought they were going. Out of the corner of his eye, Toshi noticed his friend balling his fists and nudged him, silently urging him to stay calm. They were simply trying to go home, but Bakugo's taunts escalated. He grinned, suggesting that their parents wouldn't mind if they were late. The thought of Bakugo's arrogance stirred a dark longing within Toshi, but he quickly pushed it aside as he felt a familiar presence shake him gently. Toshi looked up to see his friend with a mix of fear and amusement in his eyes. His friend had been muttering, which startled Bakugo, who wore a mask of bravado but was clearly unsettled. Toshi found a strange amusement in the idea of his friend being perceived as dangerous, even though he knew it was just a passing thought. They needed to leave before things escalated further, especially since their parents would be worried. Toshi took his friend's hand, and they walked past Bakugo and his companions without a second glance. As soon as 𝗛𝐿 woke up, he wondered if Izuku remembered it was the last day of school. He chuckled to himself and rolled out of bed, going through his morning routine before heading down the hall. He knocked on Izuku's door, expecting him to answer quickly. When he didn't, 𝗛𝐿 opened it to find Izuku startled, halfway through removing his vigilante suit. 𝗛𝐿 closed the door, informing Izuku that they needed to leave for school soon. Izuku nodded and headed to the bathroom. While waiting for Izuku, 𝗛𝐿 grabbed a piece of bacon from the kitchen. Their dad asked if he was excited for the summer, and 𝗛𝐿 smirked, acknowledging that they would be training for half of it. A moment later, Izuku dashed down the stairs, snatching a piece of bacon and dragging 𝗛𝐿 out of the house, calling out to their parents that they loved them. When they arrived at school, Izuku forgot to hide and rushed inside, trying to make it to class on time. Once they reached their classroom, 𝗛𝐿 opened the door and sat down. Soon, the rest of the class and the teacher arrived. Mrs. Sanda announced that it was the last day of school and they would have a last-minute quiz. The students groaned, but Mrs. Sanda used her quirk to grab their attention, floating various objects around her desk. The quiz was about their future aspirations, and Mrs. Sonda playfully acknowledged that most of them likely wanted to be heroes. As the class cheered, 𝗫𝐿 felt the need to hold Izuku back from responding to Bakugo, who was boasting about his own potential. Just then, Mrs. Sonda mentioned that both Izuku and 𝗫𝐿 had expressed interest in attending UA, which made Izuku bounce with excitement. However, Bakugo's anger was palpable, and 𝗫𝐿 knew they would face him after school. As Bakugo hurled insults at them, suggesting they were worthless, 𝗫𝐿 felt a mix of disbelief and concern. It was one thing to insult someone, but Bakugo's words crossed a line. Izuku's eyes turned red with emotion, which startled 𝗫𝐿. Without a word, he grabbed Izuku's wrist and hurried home, worried about his friend's sudden change. Izuku was confused and frightened by the sudden shift in his emotions, but 𝗫𝐿's grip reassured him as they ran home together. When they arrived home, Toshi burst through the door and shouted for their dad and Papa, announcing that Izuku might have discovered his quirk. As soon as he quieted down, Dad and Papa appeared, instructing Izuku to follow a series of steps. They first asked him to close his eyes and visualize a pillow moving, but nothing happened. Next, they encouraged him to focus really hard on stopping 𝗫𝐿, but that didn't work either. Finally, they told him to relax his mind and muscles and think about something emerging from his body. To their astonishment, it worked. Aizawa watched as 𝗫𝐿 rushed into the room, excitedly declaring that Izuku had gotten his quirk. He and Yamada hurried downstairs to ask Izuku to perform various tasks, similar to what they had done when they discovered their own quirks. After a few attempts, they instructed him to relax and visualize something coming out of him. To their amazement, a black tar-like substance emerged from his hands. Aizawa noted the peculiar glow in Izuku's eyes, reminiscent of his own. Yamada, filled with excitement, urged Izuku to open his eyes. When he did, they widened in disbelief as he caught sight of his reflection in the mirror. Izuku exclaimed that he had a quirk similar to 𝐼𝐻𝐻, known as Lariat, and was thrilled about the potential of having two powerful quirks. After sharing his enthusiasm, he expressed a longing to test his new abilities. With permission from Aizawa and Yamada, he went outside to practice moving the tendrils and testing their flexibility. After about 30 minutes, Aizawa called him back to the car. As they drove to the quirk doctor, Izuku asked if they were going to see the specialist. Aizawa nodded in response. Once in the doctor's office, they underwent several tests. The doctor returned with the results, revealing that Izuku had an emitter-type quirk called Black Whip. He expressed happiness that Izuku was okay and handed him a file with more information about his quirk. On the way home, Izuku excitedly recounted everything he had learned about Black Whip, explaining how it allowed him to create tendrils of black energy from his arms. He noted that these tendrils would enhance his mobility and mentioned the need for goggles to protect his eyes from the wind, especially since they turned red when his quirk was active. As Izuku rambled on, Aizawa noticed 𝗫𝐿 looking a bit tense. He approached him and gently nudged him, asking if he was all right. 𝗫𝐿 looked up, surprised, and managed a small smile. He admitted to feeling anxious about the future, especially with the upcoming UA entrance exam. He expressed concern about how Bakugo would react to Izuku's new quirk, fearing that he might be upset about Izuku having a quirk that could rival his own. 𝗫𝐿 hoped that if they all got into UA, Aizawa could help keep things in check. Feeling tired, he announced that he was heading to bed and said goodnight to everyone. After a while, Izuku and Yamada also decided to turn in for the night. By 11:30 p.m., all four of them were in their respective rooms, drifting off to sleep. Aizawa and Yamada snuggled under their blanket, exchanging soft goodnights before falling into a deep slumber. When Izuku woke up, he felt the urge to go for a run. However, as he got out of bed, he found himself unexpectedly pulled back down. Confused, he realized that his quirk had inadvertently stuck him to the bed. He called out for his dad, knowing he would respond quickly. Within moments, Aizawa rushed into the room, chuckling at the sight of Izuku. He quickly left to fetch Yamada and 𝗫𝐿 while Izuku struggled to deactivate his quirk. 𝗫𝐿 approached, teasingly commenting on Izuku being stuck. Fortunately, Aizawa intervened, helping Izuku free himself. Grateful, Izuku jumped up and rushed to change for his run. As he prepared to leave, he overheard Izuku mentioning having taken some pictures for fun, which made Izuku roll his eyes in exasperation. After saying goodbye to his family, Izuku set out for his run. A few minutes in, about a mile from home, he heard a voice he never expected to hear again. He turned around, only to realize he was leaving them on a cliffhanger. As 𝐒𝐮𝐬 walked down the street, she spotted someone jogging by and did a double take. When she turned around, she was shocked to see Izuku. She called out to him and he stopped, turning back in surprise. The moment he whispered her name, memories flooded back, and she confronted him about his survival, her emotions swirling as she prepared to ask her questions. How was he alive? The question burst from her lips, filled with fury as he took a step back. He stammered, trying to explain that he had been saved by heroes, but her anger only intensified. She felt herself shaking as the words poured out. She had thought he was dead. Why was he here? In a rush, she sprinted toward him, knife drawn, expecting to see fear in his eyes. Instead, she found determination, which only fueled her rage. She screamed at him to die and slashed at his torso, believing he would be too scared to dodge. But instead of freezing, he jumped back and seized her wrist, twisting it painfully. The last thing she remembered was hitting the ground. From Izuku's perspective, after hitting a pressure point on her neck, he picked her up and carried her in a bridal style as he walked back to his house. Izuku had been waiting for about 20 minutes, growing concerned that Izuku hadn't returned. He donned his capture gear and headed toward the door. When he opened it, he was met by Izuku, who was holding a woman that looked strikingly similar to him. Izuku began to greet him, but the glare Izuku shot him conveyed a clear message: not now. Understanding immediately, Izuku nodded toward the woman, and Izuku returned the gesture, handing her over. As they walked down the hall, Izuku noticed a side of Izuku he had never seen before. He was dead serious, radiating annoyance. Izuku instructed him to get Papa and Toshi immediately, his aura intensifying. Izuku quickly set the woman down on the couch and rushed to gather the others. When they all returned to the living room, they found Izuku sitting on the ground, trying to control his breathing. Izuku was the only one who could sense the anger simmering beneath the surface. He asked Izuku to calm down and explain who the woman was. Izuku stood up and requested that Izuku restrain him with his capture weapon. Once he felt everyone in the room was safe, he began to explain. The woman was 𝐒𝐮𝐬 Midoriya, his 𝐵RH mother. Izuku recounted a childhood memory of a trip to the park with his parents. They had been waiting for Aunt Mitsuki and Kaken when his father suggested getting ice cream. The expression on his father's face had sent chills down his spine, and when his mother mirrored that expression, he had felt a surge of fear. He had masked it with a smile when they asked what flavor he wanted. But as they walked away, something had covered his mouth, and he had passed out, likely from chloroform. When he woke up, two dark figures loomed over him. Panic had set in, and when one of them spoke, his emotions had shut down, leaving him numb. After a few weeks, he had come to terms with the fact that his parents had planned his kidnapping. He mentioned a person who had helped him, someone named 𝗂𝗶𝐻. Izuku interrupted, confused by the unfamiliar name. Izuku glanced at him with an amused expression, suggesting he had suspected 𝗂𝗶𝐻 had escaped. Just as he was about to continue, his eyes flared with anger, and he turned to sprint at 𝐒𝐮𝐬, but Izuku's scarf held him back. Mike and 𝗀𝐿 joined in to help restrain him. 𝐒𝐮𝐬, now sitting up with a smirk, taunted Izuku to continue his story, claiming he had been tortured and had become a villain. This only ignited Izuku's fury further. He vehemently denied her accusations, insisting he had never become a villain and was not Quirkless. As Izuku finally calmed down, they all caught a glimpse of 𝐒𝐮𝐬's stunned expression. She stuttered, questioning how he could have a quirk when she had been told he was Quirkless. Izuku, momentarily revealing a dark WHP from his hands, caused 𝐒𝐮𝐬 to faint again. 𝗀𝐿 whispered something, but Izuku quickly covered his mouth, insisting he had no idea what was being discussed and suggested they retreat to his room. After they left, Izuku and Zashi approached 𝐒𝐮𝐬, and Izuku hoisted her over his shoulder as they headed to the police station to turn her in. Once in his room, Izuku sat on his bed, scolding 𝗀𝐿 for being reckless around Izuku. He sighed, patting 𝐒𝐮𝐲𝐸's shoulder and reminding him to be more careful next time. He then moved to his desk to continue working on the V-Suite, adding features to adapt to his new quirk. As night fell, it was time for Izuku to test how Black WHP and his V-Suite work together. He jumped out of his window, activated Black WHP, and attached it to a nearby wall, climbing up the building like a hero. He felt exhilarated as he scaled the wall. After reaching the top of the building, Izuku began to extend the reach of his WHPs. While attempting to grab a trash can, he suddenly heard a scream. Instinctively, he ran toward the sound and arrived at the scene to find a girl, seemingly a bit older than him, holding a knife to a child's neck. She expressed a twisted longing to see the child's BLD but mentioned that someone named Shiggy had forbidden her from killing him. She also demanded the child's phone, chuckling with a mix of excitement and madness as the blade pressed against the boy's skin, causing a small trickle of BLD to appear. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, Izuku decided to intervene. He executed a sneak attack, tiptoeing behind her while the child kept his head turned to avoid drawing attention. Aligning his hand with a pressure point, he struck her neck with precision. She collapsed, and in a moment of kindness, Izuku caught her before she hit the ground and gently laid her down. He turned to the child and asked if he was okay, to which the boy nodded. Izuku then requested the child to call the police, and the boy complied, dialing the emergency number and explaining the situation to the operator. The operator assured him that a pro hero was nearby to assist. Grateful, the child sighed as he ended the call and put his phone away. Izuku, realizing that a pro hero would soon arrive, decided it was best for him to leave. He chuckled and hopped up the ladder on the side of the building. Upon reaching the top, he spotted the pro hero ectoplasm arriving to help the child. Later, Izuku returned home around 3:30 p.m. He climbed into bed, and as soon as his head hit the pillow, he fell asleep instantly. Izuku woke up with a groan and sat up, stretching in a cross-legged position. After finishing his stretches, he stood up and chose his outfit for the day, opting for a purple-blue hoodie, black breathes, and his signature red high tops. He then walked to 𝐮𝐲𝐸's room to check if he was awake. When he knocked, the door opened almost immediately. To his shock, he saw a man hovering over 𝐮𝐲𝐸 with a knife in hand. Reacting swiftly, Izuku activated his quirk, extending the WHPS to grab the man by the torso. Upon closer inspection, he recognized the thug as 𝐿, the same man he had apprehended after a bank robbery. Toru had an emitter-type quirk called Impact Recoil, which allowed him to reflect damage back to the attacker. Knowing this, Izuku approached with caution. Izuku opened his mouth to speak but reconsidered, realizing it was unwise to reveal his identity to a criminal standing in his brother's room with a weapon. He felt a surge of pressure emanate from him, and Toru, taken aback, demanded to know who Izuku thought he was. Toru attempted to use his quirk against Izuku but found that he couldn't, which made Izuku smirk. Just out of sight, Aizawa and Yamada were watching. Aizawa leaned in to whisper to Izuku, granting him permission to use his quirk. With that encouragement, Izuku let his aura intensify and jumped out of the window, still holding on to Toru. He landed on the grass, using his other hand to cushion the fall. As he released the restraints on his power, his demeanor shifted dramatically. The once cheerful boy transformed into a serious, calm figure, exuding an intimidating presence. Izuku addressed Toru, making it clear that he never wanted to see him near their home again. The command, delivered in a voice that sent shivers down Toru's spine, left no room for doubt. Toru nodded vigorously and fled the scene. Izuku climbed back through the window, where he found his father, 𝗂𝐿, and Toshi staring at him in shock. When they all exclaimed in unison about what had just happened, Aizawa had already erased 𝗂𝐿's quirk too. Spare Izuku's ears. Izuku calmly explained that he had been practicing his quirk, and after some questioning, his father and 𝗂𝐿 allowed him to go train. It was around 3:30 p.m., and Izuku decided to head to Dagobah Municipal Beach. He had heard it was an appealing place, but upon arrival he was dismayed to find it littered with trash. Determined to make a difference, he resolved to clean the area, thinking it would help the environment and build his strength. He began by picking up the smaller pieces of litter. "See, if I don't plan this out, I could end up worse than I am now." So first, I need to think things through. 3 months later, Yagi found today to be a pretty good day, so he decided to take a break from being All Might at least for that day. Until he found a suitable successor for One for All, he would have to continue doing what he loved. He chose to return to his favorite beach, a place he hadn't visited in a long time. He wondered if it still looked the same. Upon arriving, he was surprised by the changes, but even more so by a boy carrying a microwave across the beach toward a pile of trash. As Yagi walked down the path, he accidentally bumped into the boy, causing him to drop the window he was carrying. Yagi apologized, helping the boy pick it up, though in his small might form, he wasn't much help. He could tell how heavy the window was and marveled at how strong the boy seemed. The boy, flustered, insisted that he was the one who should apologize for being too focused on his task. He mentioned needing to work on his multitasking skills and considered asking his father and others for help. Suddenly, he introduced himself as Izuku Yamazawa, his face lighting up with a bright smile. Yagi had to shield his eyes from the brightness before responding. "It was nice to meet young Yamazawa," Yagi said, introducing himself as Yagi Toshinori. He asked if Izuku was the son of Aizawa and Yamada. Izuku seemed surprised that a stranger would know about his parents. Yagi offered to contact Yamada to confirm their connection, and Izuku nodded eagerly. Yagi took out his phone and dialed Yamada's number. "Hello." Yamada's voice boomed through the phone, prompting Yagi to pull it away from his ear. Toshinori greeted Yamada and explained that he was confirming his acquaintance with young Yamazawa. Yamada called for Aizawa, who expressed his annoyance at Yamada's quirk. When Izuku mentioned Yagi's name, Aizawa's tone shifted, and he instructed Izuku to come home immediately, even allowing him to use his quirk to get there faster. Izuku quickly activated Black WHP and vanished, leaving Yagi bewildered and amused. After leaving, Izuku realized what he had just revealed to All Might. He landed in his room and made his way downstairs, where he found his father, 𝗟𝗶, making waffles. Deciding to surprise him, he crept up behind him, noticing his dad's familiar grin, which indicated he wouldn't interfere. Izuku playfully threatened 𝗟𝗶 with a fake knife, causing a moment of panic that quickly turned into laughter when he revealed himself. Their laughter filled the kitchen until Aizawa, annoyed by the noise, asked them to quiet down. Izuku inquired about their homeroom teacher, but Aizawa shrugged it off, focusing on his breakfast. Suddenly, Izuku playfully startled them both, causing a comical scene as they hung from the ceiling, one by his quirk and the other by his scarf. Embarrassed, Izuku retreated to his room, changed into workout clothes, and announced he was heading to the gym before leaving the house. After his gym session, Izuku returned home around 9:30 p.m., ready to call it a day. He took a quick shower, changed into pajamas, and climbed into bed. After several minutes of tossing and turning, his body finally surrendered to the comforting embrace of sleep. So, the decision was made to act immediately. Izuku had never encountered the sludge monster, which meant he had never met All Might and never received One for All. This story was crafted primarily to make Bakugo face some challenges. Bakugo's day began like any other. He woke up, yelled at his mother, went to school, received praise for his impressive skills, bullied Deku, and then headed home. However, today was different. As he walked home with his so-called friends, 2 large bottles suddenly fell from the sky, nearly hitting him. He looked up, ready to unleash his fury, but found no one in sight. He could have sworn he saw All Might soaring by. As he resumed walking, his friends screamed and ran off, leaving him bewildered and annoyed. Bakugo muttered to himself about their cowardice when he heard a sinister chuckle behind him. Turning around, he came face to face with a mass of living sludge. The villain taunted him, suggesting they should see how big his ego was after their encounter. Frustrated, Bakugo interrupted, asserting that the villain was mistaken if he thought he could defeat him. In an instant, the sludge lunged at him. Activating his quirk, Bakugo attempted to blast the creature, only to discover that his explosions had no effect on the liquid surrounding it. As the sludge began to envelop his legs, he focused on creating explosions to alert the nearby pro heroes. Fortunately, his efforts paid off, and soon 3 pro heroes appeared before him. But as he struggled against the living liquid, civilians began to gather and watch. In a moment of panic, 𝐾𝐭𝐬 shouted in desperation, realizing too late that it was a rookie mistake. The sludge surged into his mouth, and he fought to breathe, terrified but determined not to show fear. He wondered why the heroes weren't intervening. Suddenly, a boy with blonde hair and blue eyes sprinted toward him, ignoring the heroes' shouts for him to stop. As he reached 𝐾𝐭𝐬, he used his quirk to phase through the sludge and pulled 𝐾𝐭𝐬 free. The villain was taken aback, unable to finish his threat as 𝐼𝐼𝐻 appeared out of nowhere and delivered a powerful blow to the creature, subduing it. 𝐼𝐻 praised the boy for his quick thinking, and the other heroes rushed to 𝐾𝐭𝐬 and his rescuer. 𝐾𝐮𝐲 complimented the boy for his bravery in saving 𝐾𝐭𝐬 and creating an opportunity for 𝐼𝐻 to capture the villain. 𝐾𝐭𝐬, feeling frustrated, grumbled about how he could have saved himself and walked away, a hint of disappointment lingering in his thoughts. Meanwhile, 𝗪𝐻𝐿 was excited for the day ahead, as he and Izuku were determined to pass the entrance exam for 𝐻𝐬. Their mentor, 𝐷𝐴DZUA, had recommended them, which added to their anticipation. As they approached the gates of 𝐻𝐬, they paused in awe, realizing they were finally here. 𝗪𝐻𝐿 asked Izuku if they were ready to prove they were not just a pair of worthless misfits, and Izuku nodded with determination. As they entered the gates, 𝐾𝐭𝐬 shoved past Izuku, causing him to stumble. Ignoring 𝐾𝐭𝐬's insult, 𝗪𝐻𝐿 rushed to help Izuku, but a girl with brunette hair intervened, using her quirk to lift Izuku just before he hit the ground. Surprised, Izuku quickly regained his composure and used his own quirk to pull himself down, smiling at the girl and thanking her. As they entered the auditorium, 𝗪𝐻𝐿 spotted their mentor on stage, easily recognizable by his loud voice. They took their seats, relieved to be far from 𝐾𝐭𝐬. When all the contestants arrived, their mentor began explaining the exam. A boy with dark blue hair interrupted, questioning the number of robots present. The interruption drew attention to 𝗪𝐻𝐿 and Izuku, prompting their mentor to remind them they were not supposed to be there. Despite the admonishment, 𝗪𝐻𝐿 firmly declared that they were participating in the test, with Izuku nodding in agreement. "Would you like me to get 𝐼𝐻𝐿?" he asked with a smirk, only to see Dad's mischievous grin behind the curtains. Panic set in as he shouted for Izuku to run. They both dashed for the door, but Dad was quicker. "Nice try, you two. But you're coming with me." In less than 10 seconds, they found themselves being pulled across the stage by Dad's capture weapon. "We want to do the test," Izuku groaned, while the other one screamed in frustration. "You two are just like 𝐼𝐻𝐻," Dad remarked, pulling them to their feet, wrapping a scarf around one's mouth to quiet the protests, and dragging them to the recommended room. Upon entering, everyone turned to look at them in surprise. "So these are the two. Sit them down at the front so I can keep an eye on them, 𝐼𝐻𝐿," Vlad King instructed. Dad complied with gratitude. "Thanks, Kansas, make sure they don't leave this room. I found them in the information briefing," he added before leaving. "Dang it, we were so close. Darn that blue-haired kid. If he hadn't made Papa look at us, we could have done the exam," Izuku lamented. As the exam began, Papa shouted, "Goose!" The contestants stood frozen, unsure of what to do. "What are you waiting for? There's no countdown during a battle. Go!" He yelled again, and this time they responded. Throughout the exam, Izuku and the other one attempted to escape to the field 11 times, only to be stopped each time by Vlad King. Eventually, he grew so frustrated that he tied them up with a rope. "There, maybe you'll stay still now," he sighed, and they pouted in response. A boy with dull hair and heterochromatic eyes watched them with confusion. He asked, "Why do you two want to do the exam so badly?" The other one replied, "How badly do you want to escape from that difficult home with your siblings?" "The answer is the same for us. We want to prove ourselves. To show we're not weak. You were abused to become stronger, just like us. Also, 𝗟𝗏𝐻 is not a good person." Izuku spoke without even looking at the boy. "How did you know that?" the boy stuttered. "Easy, that guy has tried to." Izuku caught himself, slamming his hand over his mouth and somehow freeing himself from the ropes. Just then, a scream echoed from the monitors, and Izuku's head whipped around, giving 𝗪𝐻𝐿 and Todoroki whiplash as they turned to look at him. Realizing what was happening, he cursed and charged onto the exam grounds, sprinting toward a massive robot. his focus was solely on the girl in danger beneath it. He knew he wouldn't reach her in time without using his quirk, so he activated it, his hair rising and eyes glowing red. Without hesitation, he unleashed Black WHP and propelled himself forward. When he reached the girl, he recognized her as the one from that morning, which only fueled his determination to save her. Using Black WHP, he secured a grip on the robot's leg and began to climb. With the control panel located on its leg, he hacked into it and managed to stop the robot. After successfully reprogramming it to stand still, he jumped off and rushed to the brunette, clearing the rubble from her leg and lifting her up. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted Recovery Girl approaching with a knowing smile. "Oh no. Hey, how are you doing, Chio?" he asked, almost stuttering in fear. "Izuku, how many times have I told you not to hurt yourself?" she scolded, pulling on his ears. "Ow. You can be just as loud as Papa, you know that," he replied as she healed the girl's leg. "Yes, I know that. It's why All Might is scared of me," she said, walking away while Izuku rubbed his ear. After receiving praise for his heroism and a scolding for his recklessness, everyone in the 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐲 family headed home. "I'm going to bed," one said. "Same," another replied. "Me too. I'm tired," a third chimed in. "You're always tired, Aizawa," the four Yamazawas mumbled as they went in separate directions, all leading to their cozy beds. Izuku felt a mix of confusion and excitement about how quickly things had changed. Just 2 days ago, they had only 8,000 reads, and now they had over 10. He couldn't believe it. Later, Izuku was approached by Toshi, who asked if he wanted to train that day. Izuku nodded, and Toshi suggested they go full power, but Izuku proposed they do it without quirks. They took their positions and charged at each other. Sharing similar fighting styles as sons of Eraserhead, Izuku had the advantage, having adapted to various fighting techniques. He noticed Toshi's foot shift and countered with precision, bringing him down to the ground. "Surrender," Izuku declared, applying pressure to Toshi's shoulders. "Fine. I surrender," Toshi grunted, and Izuku climbed off him. "How about 3 out of 1? Izuku suggested, earning a bewildered look from Toshi. "How about we ask Dad to help us? You're obviously stronger than me, maybe you're as strong as him." Almost immediately, Dad appeared beside them. "I'm okay with testing out his abilities. Are you okay with it, Izuku?" Dad asked, and Izuku nodded in agreement. After ensuring Papa and Toshi were out of the way, a mischievous grin spread across their faces as they took their positions. When Papa shouted, "Go!" Dad and Izuku charged at each other immediately. Dad's scarf billowed behind him, but Izuku leaped over it, aiming to land a hit. As expected, Dad dodged and tried to kick Izuku in the ribs. Izuku countered, landing a kick to Dad's chest, causing him to cough slightly, but he continued to retaliate fiercely. The two exchanged punches and kicks in a blur of movement, with Papa and Toshi watching the flurry of black and dark green. After several minutes of intense action, Izuku managed to pin Dad to the ground, using Black Whip to cover his eyes while another tendril held him down. Breathing heavily, Izuku urged Dad to surrender, and though it was barely audible, Dad mumbled his agreement, practically kissing the ground beneath him. Izuku thought to himself that Dad was much stronger than the small-time thugs they had faced before. Once he emerged from the bath, Izuku found Dad, Papa, and Toshi on the couch, engrossed in a movie. He greeted them with a smirk, teasingly asking when he had started calling them by those names. Dad, almost spilling his coffee, inquired about it, and Izuku casually mentioned he had begun doing so a little while ago. As he settled on the couch next to Papa, Dad grunted and returned his focus to the screen. Before Izuku could forget, he reminded them that started in 2 days, prompting him and Toshi to dash to Dad's room. The sound of the door slamming echoed, followed by laughter. Izuku turned to Toshi, asking if he had finished learning sign language. Toshi looked up with a bright smile and signed that he had indeed learned it. Izuku praised him, and just as he was about to leave, Toshi asked if he could be called Hitoshi or Shinkuin at school, while still referring to Izuku as Izuku. Understanding Toshi's hesitation, Izuku nodded and embraced him, assuring him it was fine, though he would still call him Toshi in private. Toshi smiled and opened the door, revealing one of their overprotective parents. It was Dad, who sheepishly admitted that Mike had told him to do it before retreating to the living room. Izuku decided to train his stamina a bit more, bidding Toshi farewell as he headed back to his. It was the first day at U. For Izuku and Toshi, and Aizawa had to rise early. He struggled to escape Yamada's grip, surprised by how strong he was despite his slender frame. Aizawa urged Yamada to wake up, reminding him it was the first day back. Yamada stirred slightly, and Aizawa grinned as he prepared for a surprise. He opened Izuku's door and whispered to Yamada to get ready. In an instant, Izuku was out of bed, Black Whip activated and a knife at Yamada's throat. Realizing it was just his dad, the knife clattered to the floor as Izuku apologized profusely, thinking Yamada was an intruder. Aizawa knelt to Izuku's level, picking him up and giving him a reassuring hug that halted his apologies. Yamada sweetly reassured Izuku that it was okay, and 𝗀𝐿, watching the scene unfold, expressed his concern. Izuku confirmed he was alright, relieved he hadn't harmed anyone. 𝗀𝐿 hugged Izuku, and they shared a moment of camaraderie. Aizawa reminded them they had 20 minutes to get ready before leaving for U. With determination, both boys nodded and rushed to prepare. A short while later, they gathered in the kitchen for breakfast before heading out to the car, ready for their first day. Upon arriving at U, Izuku and 𝗀𝐿 made their way to Class 1A, finding the door and pushing it open to discover they were the first ones there. They chose seats near the front, but soon the blue-haired boy from the information session approached them, surprised to see them. He declared that they should not be in the class since they hadn't taken the exam, but Toshi quickly interjected that they were there on recommendations. The blue-haired boy stumbled back, taken aback by their presence. Izuku felt a wave of regret wash over him as he apologized, realizing he had spoken out of turn. He hoped they could move past the misunderstanding and become friends. He introduced himself, along with his brother Hitoshi, and asked for the other boy's name. The boy introduced himself as Tenya Ida, expressing his longing to be friends as well. After a while, the classroom filled up, leaving only one seat empty. Suddenly, the door burst open, and in walked a very angry figure. The figure shouted angrily, demanding to know what everyone was doing there. Izuku and Hitoshi exchanged unimpressed glances, acknowledging the chaos. They explained that they were recommended to be there. The atmosphere shifted as the figure revealed himself to be their father, Shota Aizawa, who introduced himself as their teacher. Izuku and Hitoshi were taken aback, sharing their disbelief at the situation. Their father, with a mischievous grin, instructed them to change into their uniforms and head to the training grounds. As annoyance bubbled within him, Izuku stood his ground, and their father approached him, placing a hand on his shoulder. He warned Izuku to comply, or he would make their time there difficult. Izuku took a deep breath, suppressing his emotions, and met his father's gaze with a steely expression. He could see his father flinch slightly. With a playful tilt of his head, Izuku teased him, and his brother Hitoshi burst into laughter at the scene. After a few moments, they both left the room, leaving their classmates in a state of shock. Once outside, Hitoshi chuckled, and they made their way to the changing room. Hitoshi had chosen a long-sleeve uniform for Izuku, knowing he was self-conscious about his scars. Izuku thanked him, and soon, the rest of the class joined them on the training grounds. Ida approached them, commenting on Izuku's earlier display and noting that it had frightened the rest of the class. They nodded in acknowledgement. Izuku then asked Ida if he thought the rest of the class would want to be friends. Ida replied that he couldn't speak for everyone, but it was worth asking. Izuku approached other students, introducing himself to Shoto Todoroki and Momo Yaoyorozu. Todoroki shook his hand confidently, while Momo hesitated before accepting his greeting. Izuku reassured her that he meant no harm, and she smiled back, agreeing to call him by his first name. Just then, Izuku felt a familiar presence behind him. He turned to see Bakugo approaching, and instinctively tried to avoid him. However, Bakugo managed to grab his arm, causing Izuku to wince in pain from a previous injury. Todoroki noticed and quickly intervened, freeing Izuku from Bakugo's grip. Izuku attempted to tend to his arm, activating his quirk to stop the bleeding. Todoroki offered support, and despite Hitoshi's initial hesitation, he stepped back, allowing Todoroki to help. As the situation unfolded, their father emerged outside, witnessing the scene. His anger flared, and Bakugo found himself restrained by their father's scarf, looking quite startled. Todoroki looked at Izuku with curiosity after they arrived at Recovery Girl's office. He noticed the annoyance in Izuku's eyes when he asked about his arm. Izuku expressed his frustration about 𝗟𝗏, referring to him in a derogatory manner. Todoroki realized how strongly Izuku felt about his father. Izuku then mentioned their connection, revealing that he knew a lot about 𝗟𝗏. He offered his condolences for Todoroki's struggles and shared that his mother missed him and wanted to see him. Todoroki was surprised to hear that Izuku had met his mother. Izuku extended his hand, suggesting he could help arrange a meeting. After a moment of hesitation, Todoroki accepted the gesture, feeling gratitude wash over him. Izuku encouraged him to express his emotions, and as Todoroki began to cry, Izuku embraced him, allowing him to release his feelings. When Izuku looked down, he noticed that Todoroki had fallen asleep in his lap after crying. He felt relieved that Todoroki had opened up to him. Just then, Recovery Girl entered the room, and Izuku gestured for her to be quiet, pointing to Todoroki. She acknowledged him and quietly informed him that he could leave whenever he wanted but suggested he rest a little longer. Exhausted from his night patrols, Izuku decided to take a nap, forgetting that Todoroki was still resting on him. Upon waking, Izuku heard his classmates, including his father, talking. He groaned and turned away, mumbling for a few more minutes of sleep. It was only when he felt Todoroki shift that he realized he was still there. Concerned, he asked if Todoroki was okay. Todoroki smiled and apologized for falling asleep on him. Izuku reassured him that it was fine and they both got up to leave the room. Once outside the classroom, Izuku placed a hand on Todoroki's shoulder and asked if he could call him 𝗏𝗏 or 𝗏𝗏-kun. Todoroki agreed and asked if they were friends now. Izuku's smile confirmed it, and Todoroki returned the gesture as they entered the classroom together. Izuku's father nodded in approval, allowing them to be late. However, when Izuku saw Toshi's expression, anxiety filled him as he anticipated trouble. As expected, when school ended, Toshi rushed at him, teasing about his feelings for Todoroki. Flustered, Izuku denied it, knowing Toshi would make his life difficult for weeks if he didn't put a stop to it. Later, Izuku found himself confronted by his family, particularly Toshi, who was eager to hear about his relationship with Todoroki. Izuku groaned, realizing he would have to address their questions. He insisted that he and Todoroki were just friends, despite the nickname he had given him. His family chuckled at the contradiction, pointing out that calling Todoroki 𝗏𝗏-kun was a sign of something. Frustrated, Izuku warned them to stop leaning against the door frame, fearing he might accidentally hurt them in his irritation. He felt a vain throb in his forehead as he tried to maintain his composure. After a quick shuffle, he locked himself in his room, pondering his feelings for Todoroki. He questioned whether he liked him, recalling how comfortable it felt to have him resting on his chest. Izuku shook his head, trying to dismiss the thoughts and prepare for school. Determined to avoid any teasing, he got ready and grabbed a banana for breakfast, eager to arrive at school before anyone else. He called out a goodbye to his family, explaining his early departure. His father nodded, continuing to enjoy his breakfast. As the protagonist walked up the mountain, a flash of blue caught their eye. Instinctively, they heightened their guard, aware that being the Black Fox came with many enemies and a developed sixth sense for danger. They called out, questioning who was there, alerting the figure they had spotted. A huff reached their ears, prompting a swift turn to see a man around 5 feet 9 inches with an amputated hand obscuring part of his face, making identification difficult. The man wore tight black clothing, and one of his eyes appeared to be red, complemented by pastel blue hair. The protagonist racked their brain for any encounters with someone like him, recalling the name Tomura Shigaraki. However, they decided to keep this knowledge to themselves. They approached the man, offering assistance in finding his way. Tomura glanced between the protagonist and the school, confirming their suspicions about his villainous nature. He stated he was not lost but searching for someone. The protagonist, maintaining a sympathetic demeanor despite feeling uneasy, asked who he was looking for, hoping to help. Suddenly, a loud voice called out, startling both of them. It was Himiko Toga, the creepiest villain the protagonist had ever met. In a moment of panic, they declared their intention to leave and dashed up the mountain, leaving a bewildered Shigaraki and a disappointed Toga behind. Toga lamented wanting to see Shigaraki's cute BLD, prompting the protagonist to shout back that this was precisely why they had run. Shigaraki's response of "understandable" echoed in the air as the protagonist sighed in relief, finally entering U and heading straight to Class 1A, eager to avoid socializing. Upon arriving, they expressed gratitude for being the first one there, dropping their bag onto a chair and sinking into it. After a few moments of silence, the door opened, and Todoroki entered, briefly meeting the protagonist's gaze before offering a small smile and taking his seat at the back of the classroom. The protagonist felt a warmth rise to their cheeks, realizing they might be blushing because of Todoroki. After a brief nap, they were poked awake by Todoroki, who informed them that class was about to start. The protagonist nodded, sitting up and preparing for the lesson ahead. After class, they braced themselves for their least favorite yet favorite subject. Language arts could be both a favorite and least favorite subject for some. It was the class right before lunch, and the noise from Papa was often overwhelming. The loudness had become familiar, as he sometimes accidentally activated his quirk at home. Upon entering the classroom, the sudden burst of Papa's signature cheer startled everyone. The expression on Papa's face shifted from worry to sheer terror, as he anticipated the chaos that would follow. Toshi, standing protectively in front of Izuku, seemed to sense the impending commotion. Mike had managed to avoid trouble for the moment, but Izuku's luck was waning. Noticing the distressed look on Izuku's face, Yamada quickly instructed the class to quiet down. He then told Izuku that if he needed to step outside, he should do so. Without hesitation, Izuku stood and exited the classroom. Mike then asked Todoroki to follow Izuku, ensuring he wouldn't do anything reckless. Outside, Todoroki found Izuku sitting under a tree. Deciding to join him, Todoroki took a seat beside him, but this turned out to be a mistake. When Izuku was lost in thought, he had a tendency to react instinctively to any touch. As Todoroki tapped him on the shoulder, Izuku quickly turned and, in a flash, Todoroki found himself on the ground, looking up at him. Realizing the awkward position they were in, Izuku's face flushed with embarrassment, and he scrambled to get off Todoroki. Apologizing profusely, Izuku rubbed the back of his neck, clearly flustered. Todoroki chuckled, acknowledging that it was his fault for startling Izuku. As Izuku leaned back against the tree trunk, Todoroki expressed concern about Izuku's earlier outburst in class. He tilted his head, causing Izuku to blush even more. Izuku stammered as he explained that he had warned Mike about the next time he flung him against a wall with his quirk. Todoroki decided not to press further, instead asking for advice. Surprised, Izuku encouraged him to share whatever was on his mind. Todoroki confessed that he was feeling an emotion he couldn't quite place, something that felt like wanting to be more than just friends with someone. With a smile, Izuku playfully teased Todoroki about having a crush and explained that the feeling was love. He suggested that Todoroki could either confess his feelings or let them fade away. Todoroki then turned serious, stating that he had something important to say. Confusion washed over Izuku as he listened intently. With a steady voice, Todoroki revealed his feelings, confessing that he liked Izuku and asked if he would be his boyfriend. The air was thick with anticipation, leaving an unspoken tension lingering between them. Izuku sat there in complete disbelief. He questioned whether Todoroki really liked him, and when Todoroki nodded, Izuku felt a rush of emotions. He opened his mouth to say something, and almost as if his mouth had a mind of its own, he simply said, "Sure." Todoroki's eyes widened in surprise, and his jaw dropped. Izuku chuckled and gently pushed Todoroki's jaw back up, bringing him out of his daze. Suddenly, Todoroki stood up, pulling Izuku into a warm hug. Unsure of what to do, Izuku hugged him back. Todoroki then asked what they should do next, and Izuku shrugged, admitting he hoped Todoroki had an idea. They both laughed, and Izuku couldn't help but think that Todoroki's laughter sounded like an appealing melody. When Todoroki noticed Izuku had stopped laughing, he looked down and smiled, asking what was wrong while tilting his head. Izuku blushed and looked away, thinking how cute Todoroki was. He stuttered that it was nothing, but soon felt Todoroki's hand on his cheek, gently pulling his face closer. The moment their eyes met, Izuku blushed even harder. Todoroki smirked and teased him about getting flustered. Embarrassed, Izuku looked at his shoes, wishing for another chance to hug Todoroki. Gathering his courage, he asked if he could give Todoroki another hug. Todoroki chuckled and opened his arms, and Izuku took the opportunity to run into his embrace. After a few moments, Todoroki sighed, reminding Izuku that they needed to return to class or else their teacher would send the whole school looking for them. Izuku groaned but knew he had to go back. He looked up at Todoroki, blushing slightly, and asked if they could keep their relationship a secret for now. Todoroki agreed, sharing that he didn't want his father to know about them either. They walked back to class hand in hand, but as they reached the door, they let go and acted as if nothing had happened. Izuku noticed his father's worried expression and assured him he was fine, smiling at everyone except for Toshi, who glared at the other boys. Izuku smirked at Todoroki before sitting down. After school, he waited outside the gates for Todoroki. Toshi approached him, saying their dad offered to drive them home, but Izuku replied that he was going to walk with a friend. Toshi chuckled, thinking Izuku was crazy for passing up a ride, but wished him to get home safely before heading back to the parking lot. Moments later, Todoroki walked out with a small smirk, causing Izuku to blush and look away. Todoroki greeted him, holding out his hand, and Izuku smiled, taking it in response. He playfully called Todoroki Roki, which made him choke on air. Izuku couldn't help but enjoy the moment. They walked side by side until they reached the park Izuku used to visit as a child. He pulled Todoroki over to the swing set and explained that there was something about the park that made him feel like he was forgetting something important. Out of the blue, Todoroki asked if he could kiss Izuku. With a smile, Izuku nodded, and they both leaned in. Just as they were about to share their first kiss, someone bumped into Izuku, causing him to stumble backward. He looked up to see a very annoyed Bakugo. Izuku shouted in surprise, but quickly covered his mouth. He turned to Todoroki and yelled for them to run, grabbing Todoroki's hand and dragging him away from the now furious Bakugo, who shouted threats. They ran as fast as they could, eventually ending up at Izuku's house. He opened the door, pulled Todoroki inside, and slammed the door shut just as Bakugo reached them. Izuku turned to see his family smirking at him, and all the color drained from his face as he realized they had witnessed everything. He yelled that he wouldn't come out, grabbing Todoroki's hand and dragging him down the hallway into his room. Outside the door, Izuku heard his father say they needed to talk after Todoroki left. Izuku sighed and turned to see Todoroki sitting on his bed, smirking. When Todoroki mentioned that their teachers were Izuku's parents, Izuku froze, feeling uncertain. Todoroki chuckled and walked closer, placing his hand on Izuku's cheek and leaning down. Knowing what was coming, Izuku leaned in, and they shared a soft kiss. After a moment, they pulled away to catch their breath, and Izuku looked into Todoroki's eyes, feeling a warmth spread through him. Izuku had mostly forgotten what happened during his time with the League of Villains, including the people he had encountered. The only ones he remembered fully were 𝐼𝐴 and Kurojirai, which is why he couldn't recall Toga and Shigaraki when he first met them. Todoroki had been thinking about what Izuku's parents would be like after Izuku suddenly ran toward his house to escape Bakugo. He imagined that Izuku's mother would have green hair like him and a sweet personality, while his father would have black hair and a serious demeanor. He realized he wasn't wrong about their personalities, just their appearances. When Todoroki asked Izuku if their teachers were his parents, Izuku froze in place. Todoroki chuckled, stood up, and walked over to him. As their gazes connected, he leaned in, pleased to see Izuku leaning in as well. Their lips met, and Todoroki wrapped his arm around Izuku's waist, pulling him closer. After a moment, they pulled away, and Todoroki decided to speak. He addressed Izuku, who looked up at him. Todoroki smiled at the adorable nickname Izuku had given him and whispered that he loved him. Izuku smiled back, affirming his feelings. They gazed into each other's eyes, and Todoroki sighed, realizing they needed to go out and tell Izuku's family. Izuku shivered with fear at the thought, but reluctantly agreed to lead the way. As they joined the others, Aizawa sighed, commenting on how long it took them. Mike looked at them intensely, while Izuku glared at 𝗀𝐻𝐻. Aizawa addressed Todoroki, confirming that he and Izuku were dating. Todoroki nervously affirmed this, and Aizawa warned him that if he broke Izuku's heart, he would face serious consequences. Todoroki felt a chill run down his spine at the threat. Izuku's family smirked at the exchange, and Mike teased Todoroki about the nickname situation. Izuku groaned, knowing they would never let it go. As they settled on the couch, close enough for their arms to touch, Todoroki tried to win 𝗀𝐻𝐻 over by greeting him. 𝗀𝐻𝐻 warned Todoroki that he would protect Izuku fiercely, and Todoroki acknowledged this with a nod. After a moment, 𝗀𝐻𝐻 asked Izuku if they could talk privately. Izuku shrugged and stood up, asking his father not to harm Todoroki. Aizawa sighed as Izuku walked away with 𝗀𝐻𝐻. Mike then turned to Todoroki, revealing that he and Aizawa were not Izuku's biological parents. He explained how they had rescued Izuku from a group of villains when he was a child. Mike urged Todoroki not to let this information cloud his judgment about Izuku. Once outside of earshot, 𝗀𝐻𝐻 asked Izuku when he would tell Todoroki about the whole Black Fox situation. Izuku was surprised and admitted he wasn't sure when he would share that part of his past. He wanted to ensure that Todoroki wouldn't immediately inform the pro heroes after he told him. With a quick smile, he decided it was time to return to the living room. A few minutes later, Izuku re-entered the room with 𝗀𝐻𝐻 behind him. Todoroki noticed Izuku's sudden blush and teased him about it. Izuku warned Todoroki that he would use his quirk if he didn't stop. Todoroki chuckled and pulled Izuku into a hug, asking if he needed a reason to hug his boyfriend. Izuku laughed and then pulled away, extending his hand for Todoroki to take. They walked down the hallway together, and Todoroki inquired about their destination. Izuku revealed they were going to his room to study. As the evening wore on, Todoroki felt sad about having to leave. He glanced at Izuku and thought he saw a flicker of anger in his eyes, but it quickly faded to happiness tinged with sadness. He expressed his love for Izuku, who reciprocated the sentiment. They shared a brief but meaningful kiss, filled with affection. Afterward, Izuku asked if Todoroki wanted to stay the night. Todoroki wished he could but knew his father would disapprove. Izuku's eyes flashed with frustration before he hugged Todoroki and led him to the door. He opened it, gave Todoroki one last kiss on the cheek, and said goodbye. In another part of town, a frustrated figure vented about their inability to capture a single villain. The frustration boiled over as they shouted, not caring about disturbing anyone nearby. After several hours of intense training, which was more about releasing pent-up anger than actual practice, they stormed down the hall to Shoto's room and shouted his name, startling him into action. Good attempt, but it's time to train so you can get ready for school and surpass All Might. As he yelled to wake Shoto, he felt something watching him and turned around, only to see a closed window. It was strange, but he brushed it off. "Father, I'm done," Shoto announced, standing ready for his training session. "Good. Now go to the dojo and start with 50 squats, push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, and leg lunges. Finish with a 5-minute plank." Shoto nodded and headed to the dojo. Izuku knew he probably shouldn't have been spying, but he was curious about Roki's home life in the mornings. It had become a personal mission to help Roki and his siblings escape their difficult situation. After nearly being caught by 𝗀𝐻𝐻𝐻, he left the Todoroki property and began leaping across the rooftops of the city, hoping to assist someone in need. As he landed on a roof near his house, he heard fighting in an alleyway. Curiosity piqued, he peered over the edge and felt a chill run down his spine. His father lay on the ground, injured and struggling to stand. A villain approached, stepping on his father's stomach to keep him down. "Any last words, Eraserhead?" the villain taunted. Fueled by adrenaline, Izuku jumped off the roof, landing behind the villain. He shouted that he had something to say and charged at the villain, who turned his attention to him. Dodging a thrown knife, he quickly regained his footing and delivered a powerful uppercut, causing the villain to stagger. "Who are you?" the villain demanded. "The name's Black Fox," Izuku replied with a smirk, seizing the moment to strike the villain's pressure point. Once the villain was incapacitated, he rushed to his father and called for an ambulance. "Stay awake, Eraser. You need to stay with me," he urged, trying to staunch the bleeding. "Why did you help me?" his father rasped. "I saw someone in trouble and had to act. I didn't use my quirk, so it wasn't illegal," Izuku explained, sighing. "Now, I'm going to carry you to meet the ambulance halfway." He grunted as he lifted his father, relieved to see the flashing lights of the ambulance. They pulled over and quickly brought out a stretcher. Name: Shota Aizawa, quirk, Eraser, BLD type, B. If you need more information, I have it. Yes, I am the Vigilante Black Fox, and I have a 160 PND man bleeding in my arms, so please help him, he instructed, urgency in his voice. The paramedics hurried over, and he carefully placed his father on the stretcher. Just as he felt the weight lift, he noticed 𝐻𝐻𝐷𝐶FFS being placed on his wrists. "That's not good," he said, turning to face Naomasa Tsukachi. "It may not be good for you, but it's good for me," Tsukachi replied as he led Izuku away without resistance. "How did you know I was there?" Izuku asked as they drove. Someone from the ambulance called the police, saying that the Black Fox was holding a man in his arms. "I rushed over to capture you," Tsukachi explained. Izuku leaned back in the seat, groaning about school the next day. "I have school tomorrow." "Great." Tsukachi chuckled. "How old are you anyway?" Looking out the window, Izuku answered truthfully, aware of Tsukachi's quirk. "I'm 15 years old, and I attend the high." Tsukachi swerved slightly before pulling over to look at him in disbelief. "What?" Izuku chuckled at his reaction. "Yep, I'm in Class 1A. Only one other person knows about me being a vigilante, and no, I won't give a name." Understanding, Tsukachi resumed driving, taking him to the police station. Well, this will be an eventful evening, Izuku thought as they arrived. It was early morning, and Yamada was growing increasingly anxious as Sho had yet to return home. He muttered to himself about the time, pacing in the living room when he heard Shinso's voice asking if their dad was home. Yamada looked over to see Shinso standing there, and he shook his head, indicating that Sho was still out. Shinso sighed and took a seat on the couch, clearly struggling with insomnia. Yamada sat beside him, knowing they would both be awake for a while. Just a few minutes later, Yamada's phone rang, and he rushed to answer it, hoping it was Sho. The voice on the other end introduced himself as Yokoyama Jun and informed Yamada that Eraserhead had been attacked by a villain named Katana and was now in the Mustafa hospital. Panic surged through Yamada as he asked where the hospital was, quickly grabbing what he needed before rushing out the door. He glanced back to see Shinso following closely behind. They sped to the hospital, and upon arrival, Yamada hurried to the receptionist, asking for Eraserhead. She confirmed that he was on the 3rd floor in room 324 and pointed them in the right direction. Grateful, Yamada rushed to Sho's room, only to find 2 police officers stationed outside. After explaining their relationship, they were allowed inside. Yamada approached the bed, taking a chair and holding Sho's hand gently. He whispered a greeting, and Sho managed a faint smile, revealing that Black Fox had been the one to save him. Both Yamada and Shinso were taken aback by this revelation. Shinso quietly acknowledged that Izuku had saved their dad. Their moment was interrupted by Tsukachi entering the room, seeking to ask Sho some questions about the incident with Katana. Sho nodded in agreement, and Yamada stood to give Tsukachi his seat. Tsukachi began by asking if Sho remembered who had saved him. Sho confirmed that it was indeed Black Fox. Tsukachi then inquired if Sho knew the identity of Black Fox, to which Sho replied that if he did, he would have found him by now. Tsukachi revealed that they had narrowed down the suspects to 3 students from 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐩𝐸, Katsuki Bakugi, Denki Kaminari, and Izuku Yamazawa. Shinso questioned why Izuku would be a suspect, to which Tsukachi pointed out that no one knew his whereabouts at that moment, suggesting he might be Black Fox. As Tsukachi left the room, Yamada turned to Shinso, suspecting he had known about Izuku's secret. 𝗀𝐮𝐲 denied it at first but eventually admitted he had an inkling. Yamada expressed that he wasn't angry but rather confused and proud. 𝗀𝐮𝐲 noted that things made more sense now, especially regarding Izuku's improvement with his quirk. Yamada nodded in agreement, only to realize 𝗀𝐮𝐲 had slipped out while he was talking to Sho. He sighed, feeling exasperated by the antics of the two boys. Meanwhile, Izuku found himself in a holding cell, then an interrogation room, where he waited anxiously. Tsukachi entered and asked him questions, which Izuku answered honestly. Before leaving, Tsukachi revealed that Eraserhead and Present Mic were aware of his identity as Black Fox. The weight of this revelation overwhelmed Izuku, and he fainted. When he regained consciousness, he was lying on a sofa, and as he sat up, he felt a wave of confusion wash over him. A voice urged him to sit back up, and he slowly complied, facing the person he had feared would discover his secret. High Principal Nizu, Izuku said, letting out a small, nervous chuckle. As Nizu looked at him, he sank even further into the sofa, if that was even possible. Nizu reassured him, explaining that he was not in trouble and would not be put in jail. In fact, it was quite the opposite. He would continue attending 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 and could still be the Black Fox. However, he would need to wear a choker with a tracker at all times, and he could not use his quirk without a pro's permission while in that role. Nizu had already informed all of Izuku's teachers about the situation. After a moment of shock, Izuku put on the choker and walked outside, where Nemuri, known as Midnight, was waiting for him. She greeted him and confirmed that she was aware of the situation, urging him to follow her. As they approached Class 1A, Nemuri placed a hand on his shoulder and looked him in the eyes, wishing him good luck. Izuku flinched slightly as she walked away, slowly turning towards the classroom door. Taking a deep breath, he opened it, only to be met with his father's intense gaze. In a panic, he slammed the door shut, but luck was not on his side. His father pushed the door open effortlessly. Izuku felt a wave of dread wash over him as he was pulled into the classroom by his father's scarf. The eyes of his classmates were upon him, and he could feel their curiosity. His father began to explain that he had been attacked by a villain named Katana and that the vigilante Black Fox had saved him, instructing everyone not to ask questions. The scarf released its grip, and Izuku was told to take his seat. He could sense his father's satisfaction as he hurried to his desk, putting his head down to avoid the chuckles from his classmates. After class ended, Izuku rushed to Toshi, hiding behind him as they exited the room. He felt fortunate that his father hadn't noticed him leave. With a sigh, he asked Toshi what would happen next, as his father and 𝗂𝗶 had been tight-lipped. Toshi reassured him that nothing serious had occurred, just that Izuku had to wear a tracking choker. He was still allowed to go out at night, which surprised them both. As they walked to lunch, they were bombarded with questions from their classmates. Toshi became flustered while Izuku focused on getting his 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐷. The Baku squad, however, made it their mission to pry information from him. Frustrated, Izuku growled that he wouldn't share anything with them, causing them to back off. He sighed in relief as he took his plate to his table. Sitting down, he noticed 𝗏𝐼 gazing at him from across the table. Blushing, Izuku looked back down at his food. 𝗏𝐼 asked where he had been the previous day, expressing concern that Izuku hadn't texted him. Izuku apologized, explaining that his 𝗂𝗶 had made him go to sleep, feeling a pang of guilt for lying. 𝗏𝐼 sighed and sat next to him, returning a hug that Izuku offered. Despite the questions looming over him, Izuku felt that the day might turn out well. Once school was over, Izuku ran to 𝗏𝐼 and suggested they escape the school together. 𝗏𝐼 asked why they were running, and Izuku explained that he needed to tell him something privately. After catching his breath in an alley, Izuku gathered his courage to reveal his secret. He finally admitted that he was Black Fox. 𝗏𝐼's surprise was evident, but he quickly reassured Izuku that he was not mad. Relief washed over Izuku, and he began to tear up, crying into 𝗏𝐼's chest as he was comforted. 𝗏𝐼 promised that everything would be okay and that he would stay by Izuku's side. Feeling a sense of warmth and support, Izuku smiled and took 𝗏𝐼's hand, leading him toward his house. He knew he would have to face his family eventually, but with 𝗏𝐼 by his side, he felt ready to confront whatever awaited him. He tugged on her shirt, and she looked back to see a reassuring expression on his face as if to say, "It's going to be okay. Just go inside, I'll be right next to you the entire time." She smiled at him and walked inside. Almost as soon as she closed the door, someone cleared their throat. "Hello Izuku, Todoroki. Nice to see you finally came home." She turned around to see her entire family standing in the hallway. "Hey Dad, Roki knows the situation, but he doesn't know what happened to you. I respected your wishes and didn't tell him that," she said, frantically waving her hands in front of herself. 𝗀𝐿 chuckled and started to walk to the living room, with Dad and Papa following him. She sighed, looked at Roki, and followed them into the living room. "Now that you're finally here, we can talk about the whole vigilante thing," Papa said as she sat down on the couch, Roki still holding her hand. She gulped and took a breath. "This started when I turned 11. I'm assuming you know 𝗀𝐿 helped me. He found out I was the Black Fox when I was 12, and then you guys obviously found out when I was 14. Yes, I have evaded 𝗟𝗑𝐿 around 34 times, she explained, causing everyone to chuckle or laugh at the nickname she had given 𝗟𝗑𝐿. She smiled, pleased to have shifted the focus away from her vigilante activities for a moment. "Thank you, Izuku, for that laugh, but we need to stay focused. Just because 𝗍𝐻 didn't do anything about it doesn't mean that I won't. From now on, you and I will be training together so that I can push you to your fullest potential. This way, you won't be hurt when you go on patrol," Dad said. She smiled at him and looked at 𝗀𝐿, expecting him to say something. He sighed and glanced at Roki. "I only have to say one thing, keep him safe," he said. Roki nodded and squeezed her hand, and she smiled at them before looking back at Dad. "So when will we start the extra training? And if Roki wants to, will he be allowed to train with us?" she asked, looking Dad straight in the eyes. He sighed and nodded. "We will start in 2 days." She smiled, nodded, stood up, and excused herself and Roki. When they reached her room, they both released a breath and flopped down on her bed. She started to laugh and looked at Roki. "That was kind of weird. But I love my family, and I wouldn't trade them for the world," she said, chuckling and wrapping her arms around his torso, cuddling into his chest. Roki smirked and gently pulled her head toward his. In less than a few seconds, they were sharing a kiss on her bed. Soon, Roki's lips left hers and began to trail down her neck, leaving soft marks. As he reached a sensitive spot, she felt a shiver run up her spine and stifled a sound, but he quickly covered her mouth to keep their family from hearing. He continued his affectionate exploration, leaving a noticeable mark. When he unbuttoned her shirt and began to trail down her chest, she snapped her fingers, and he returned to kissing her neck. Before he could continue, she flipped them over, kissing his neck instead. She had to cover his mouth to muffle his sounds as she moved back up, kissing him passionately. Roki tried to flip them back over, but she held his wrists down, ensuring she stayed on top. She playfully liked his bottom lip, asking for permission, and he slightly opened his mouth, allowing her to slip her tongue inside. They engaged in a playful battle for 𝗟𝗏𝐻, but she eventually won as he surrendered to pleasure. She wrapped her arm around Roki's waist, closing the space between them, which made him respond with a soft sound. When she playfully bit his lip, he reacted with a soft 𝗚. She leaned back and smiled down at him, admiring the sight. "Roki, would you be so kind as to take your shirt off?" she asked with a playful grin. He nodded, still catching his breath, and slid his shirt off over his head. She looked at his body and whistled, impressed. "Wow, you have the body of a pro," she said, but quickly caught herself before revealing too much. "Was it your father?" she whispered, feeling a surge of anger. Roki looked at her in silence. "Yes," he finally replied, looking down. "What was that?" "I couldn't hear you," she said, her voice low but firm. Roki looked up with determination, causing her to lose her grip on his wrists as he took control. "Yes, it was my father, but you're not going to do anything. That's my responsibility," he said. She looked at him, surprised, and felt her cheeks warm as she nodded. He seemed to notice her blush, and with one hand he pinned her wrist to the bed while using the other to lift her chin, bringing her gaze back to his. "Just remember that I love you, Izuku," he said. She smiled at him. "I love you too, 𝗀𝗱𝐿." Roki smiled back, gave her a quick peck on the lips, and lay next to her in her bed. "Good night, Izuku," he said, and she replied, "Good night, Roki." A few minutes later, she woke up after Roki had fallen asleep. "Love you, Roki," she whispered, kissing him on the forehead before standing up. A couple of minutes later, she jumped out of her window, now dressed in her black fox suit. "Let's see what's going on tonight," she said with a laugh, starting to jump from roof to roof. Halfway through her patrol, she heard a scream. Instinctively, she changed direction and sprinted toward the alley from which the scream had come. Sure enough, someone was standing over a girl who looked like she had been running for her life. She waited, observing the scene unfold. "Hey, pretty lady, I bet you would love to come home with me," the figure taunted. Either way, there was no choice in the matter. When the protagonist heard that, they jumped into the alley and kicked the assailant away from the girl. The man was taken aback, and the protagonist quickly checked on the girl, asking if she was injured. She replied that she was just tired, and he sighed in relief before turning his attention back to the man. Upon getting a good look at him, he recognized Shigaraki. The protagonist whispered to themselves that they had a feeling he was a villain and approached him calmly. Noticing Shigaraki's gaze on the staff in their hand, the protagonist dropped it and clapped their hands together in front of his face, shocking him into paralysis. With a smirk, they grabbed their taser and incapacitated him. Once Shigaraki was unconscious, the protagonist turned to help the girl, only to freeze in surprise as they realized it was 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐼. They asked if she was okay and if she needed an ambulance, but she seemed dazed. Ignoring her for a moment, the protagonist tapped the call device on their collar, and Tsukachi's voice came through. He guessed it was another almost kidnapping, and the protagonist confirmed it, providing 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐼's details. They noticed her eyes widen with each piece of information shared. Tsukachi instructed them to stay put, assuring that help would arrive soon. The protagonist smiled beneath their mask, thanking Tsukachi before turning fully towards 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐼. They reassured her that they were not a stalker, introducing themselves as Black Fox, a vigilante working with the police. They explained that help would arrive shortly, holding their hands up in a peaceful gesture. 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐼 expressed her concern for the protagonist's well-being, and they chuckled, stating they were fine and relieved that no one but the villain had been hurt. After tying up Shigaraki to prevent him from using his quirk, the protagonist noticed the flashing red and blue lights of the police. They groaned and raised their hands, sitting down away from Shigaraki, who was slowly regaining consciousness. As Shigaraki demanded to be taken back, a purple portal appeared beneath them, but the protagonist quickly evaded it. They exclaimed how close that had been, vowing to stay far away from the villain. Suddenly, they heard a clicking sound and turned to find the entire police force pointing their guns at them. The protagonist introduced themselves as Black Fox, explaining their recent collaboration with the pro heroes and identifying Shigaraki as the escaping villain. As they stood up and put their hands in their pockets, a car horn sounded, drawing everyone's attention to the overly energetic present Mike, who called out for Black Fox. The protagonist yelled back for Mike to stop using his quirk, fearing it would wake everyone within a mile radius. They climbed into the car, and once home, the protagonist went straight to their room. Upon entering, they saw Todoroki peacefully sleeping on the bed and smiled, climbing in beside him and whispering goodnight. In an unknown perspective, a figure smirked and assured Izuku that they would bring him home soon before vanishing into the shadows. Later that night, the protagonist woke up to the warmth of Todoroki beside them, purring as they snuggled closer and inhaled his comforting scent. They whispered their love for him, gently moving a strand of hair from his face. Realizing they still wore their vigilante suit, they sighed and got out of bed to change into comfortable sweatpants and a large hoodie. Feeling more at ease, they returned to bed, pulling Todoroki's head onto their chest. As they drifted back to sleep, they felt his arms wrap around their waist. When they finally woke up, they opened their eyes to find Todoroki's heterochromatic gaze fixed on them. Smiling, they leaned in to kiss his forehead and greeted him warmly. They enjoyed a few peaceful moments of cuddling until the door burst open and their father entered, snapping pictures. The protagonist yelled for him to leave, throwing a pillow in his direction, but he refused to budge. After shooing him out and locking the door, The protagonist turned to find Todoroki approaching them. They smiled and embraced him, sharing details about their night, including the surprising fact that they had saved 𝗟𝗏𝐼𝐼. Todoroki pulled them back into a hug, expressing his relief that 𝗟𝗏𝐼𝐼 was okay. He whispered something that sent shivers down their spine, and the protagonist felt a rush of warmth as he leaned in closer. As he pressed against them, the protagonist felt their breath hitch, realizing the intensity of the moment. As soon as Roki's lips were back on mine, Hitoshi walked in, froze, and stared at us for a moment with a shocked expression before quickly exiting and closing the door. Neither Roki nor I noticed him. I honestly didn't care and surrendered to the moment. After about 10 minutes, Roki stopped and let go of me, only to pull me in for a hug. I mumbled into his chest, prompting him to look at me. I suggested that we go out because I was hungry for some food. He smiled and agreed, and we walked out the door hand in hand, heading to the kitchen. When we arrived, we found Dad, Papa, and Hitoshi already there. I greeted everyone with a smile and grabbed some cereal. I noticed Hitoshi's expression and asked him what was wrong. He stammered that it was nothing, and I chuckled as I continued to eat. After everyone finished their meals, they got ready for the day while I sat in the living room, watching a documentary about the history of quirks. Once everyone settled in, a conversation started, and when Dad mentioned my name, I looked up. He asked how my patrol had gone the previous night. I set down my phone and explained that I had encountered a villain named Tomura Shigaraki, who had a disintegration quirk. I also mentioned that I had saved Ochako Uraraka, a classmate of ours. Dad nodded and changed the subject. Later, all 5 of us went to the mall to get more food and clothes. As we passed an ice cream shop, I asked Dad if we could all get some. He nodded, and we walked inside. The server welcomed us, and after a moment of deliberation, I chose mint chocolate chip, Toshi picked blackberry, Dad chose vanilla, Papa opted for pineapple, and Roki selected strawberry. After Dad paid, we sat down at a table to enjoy our treats. As we laughed and chatted, we didn't notice when the doorbell rang and more people entered. Suddenly, we froze and turned around to see half of our class standing there. I stuttered a greeting, and Ida questioned why we were there with our teachers. Hitoshi simply stated that it was personal, and they reluctantly accepted his answer. It was a relief when we returned home. Once inside, Dad called for a family meeting that included Roki. After we settled down, he began to speak. He informed us that Class 1A would be going on a field trip to the USJ the next day and advised us to keep an eye out for any trouble, as he had a bad feeling. We all nodded, knowing that when Dad had a bad feeling, it was usually for a good reason. After the meeting concluded, we said goodbye to Roki, who had to return home, and then went to our rooms after wishing each other good night. As I lay in bed, I contemplated going on patrol but ultimately decided to catch up on sleep. With a smile, I drifted into a peaceful slumber, sensing that something significant was going to happen the next day. The next day, we all woke up and went to school. When the bell rang, Dad walked in and stood behind the podium. Ida yelled for everyone to sit down, then took his own seat. Dad sighed and announced that we would be going to another facility of the school, instructing us to put on our hero suits and head outside. After he finished speaking, Dad grabbed his yellow sleeping bag and exited the classroom. I sighed and followed my classmates to the changing rooms to put on my hero suit. As I donned my outfit, I could feel multiple pairs of eyes on me. Suddenly, I heard someone exclaim in surprise about the scars on my arms. I tensed up, but then felt a familiar cold hand on my shoulder, which helped me relax. I looked over to see Roki and I smiled at him. After our silent exchange, no one asked about my scars. Once I finished putting on my suit, I stepped outside to the front of the school. I greeted Hitoshi as I stood next to him, starting a conversation. When everyone had gathered, Ida began directing us to line up for the bus. I didn't expect the bus to be like this. Hitoshi, Todoroki, and I were seated at the back, trying to contain our laughter. I turned to Yamazawa, who asked about my quirk, noting that only my brother had seen it. I explained that my quirk was called Black WHP, an emitter type that produced black tendrils from my hands. She expressed admiration for my quirk, and I reassured her that her hardening quirk was also impressive, emphasizing its versatility in both offense and defense. As I finished my enthusiastic praise, I noticed 𝐾𝐿 starting to look annoyed. Yeah, but come on, your quirk is so much flashier than mine, and we can't forget about Bakugo and Todoroki's quirks as well. They're so overpowered. The speaker dramatically shook their head and sighed. That is true. 𝐾𝐿, although we can't forget the fact that Bakugo probably won't get popular because of his personality. 𝐾𝐿. This remark clearly set Bakugo off. What did you say, Frog Beach? The response was predictable. You know, we basically just met you, so it's telling that we all know your personality is a mix of flames and garbage, Kaminari chimed in with a big grin. What's with that language? You're going to regret the day you applied to this school, you loser. The speakers sat with their head in their hands, growing more confused. Is 𝐾𝐿 getting bullied? Well, I guess that's UA for you. As they calmed down, they noticed the bus slowing down. Everyone shut up and get off the bus. We're here, Dad grunted as he exited. Once everyone was off, the speaker leaned over and gave Todoroki a quick peck on the lips before jumping off the bus. When Todoroki finally got off, he wore a look of shock that sent the speaker into a fit of giggles. Wow, is that the pro hero? Oh my god, I love her. She's such an amazing hero. 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 exclaimed. Around the time 13 started to speak, the speakers stopped listening. They heard bits and pieces about being careful with their quirks and how a black hole could be dangerous. Wait, a portal? The speaker walked over to Dad and pointed to the portal. SHT-13, protect the students. Dad yelled. I'm coming with you, Eraserhead. And there's nothing you can say about it. Do I have permission to use my quirk? Dad nodded and jumped down the stairs. As the speaker jumped right behind him, they could faintly hear their classmates yelling for them to come back. But two voices caught their attention. Go beat those villains, Izuku. You can do it, 𝐒𝐮𝐲. With a smirk, the speaker began taking down the villains one by one as they approached. What is up with this kid? Someone take him down already. One of the villains shouted. Yeah, I kind of want to live, so nope. The speaker chuckled and dodged another punch, grabbing the villain's hand, twisting it, and throwing them over their shoulder. Even while fighting, they were aware of the purple smoke reappearing next to Shigaraki. How does he keep getting out of the... Never mind, I just answered my own question. It's obviously the purple thing. They grunted as they felt a sharp object graze their side. Hopping back, they checked to ensure it was just a scratch. They were lucky, it was only a graze. After finishing off the last row of villains, they saw Dad rushing at Shigaraki. Tempted to intervene, they held back and hid to watch the fight. I've figured you out, Eraserhead. Your giveaway is your hair. It floats when you activate your quirk, Shigaraki rasped, and Dad jumped away, but the speaker noticed his elbow disintegrating. Shigaraki, 𝐒𝐮𝐲. They rushed out of hiding. Oh, I was hoping you would be here, Midoriya. The speaker froze, nearly tripping. What did you just call me? They stuttered, noticing the strange look on the purple figure's face. Oh, do you not like being called by your last name? Shigaraki approached with a familiar smirk. The speaker stood frozen as memories flooded back. They stumbled backward. Oh, does the brat remember now? Fear flashed in their eyes, but then they looked at 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿, recognizing the "I'm sorry" expression. They focused back on Shigaraki and, with some effort, pulled themselves up and ran to 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿, hiding behind him. This shocked everyone present. Oh come on, Izuku, you're really hiding behind the person who works for me. 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿, bring him to me. 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 looked at the speaker, who silently begged him to refuse. Hey, Izuku, it's okay. Would you like me to warp them here as well? He asked, and the speaker's eyes lit up. Yes, they exclaimed, and suddenly Toga and 𝗂𝐵H𝐸 appeared in front of 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿. DBI. The speaker jumped on him like old times, and surprisingly, he caught them. Toguro-san. Come here. They whined, and her eyes lit up as she ran over, engulfing them in a huge hug. By now, everyone in the USJ was utterly confused. Holy cow. Did you remember? 𝗂𝐵H𝐸 asked, holding on tighter. The speaker nodded and returned the hug. They smiled, but as soon as they looked up, the smile faded into one of concern. This was the second time they had almost seen their dad die right in front of them. Almost instantly, they were flying at the Nomu that was pinning Dad down. As soon as their combat boots hit its head, its grip loosened, allowing them to pry Dad away. Okay, Shigaraki, you've crossed the line. I will tolerate you torturing and harming me, but I will not tolerate you hurting my family. They shouted, grabbing their katana and rushing at the Nomu. Soon, all that could be seen was a flash of black, green, and sometimes silver. In less time than expected, they kicked off the Nomu and stabbed it in the brain with a throwing knife as they flew backward, landing on their feet. They grabbed 𝐷𝐷𝐵, Toga, and Kurogiri, dragging them over to Dad before returning to the Nomu. I'm so sorry you had to go through this. I will put you to rest now. They sighed and activated black WHP, sliding the tendrils around the Nomu's body, ensuring an extra layer over its head. They calmed their heartbeat and radiated heat from the tendrils as smoke began to emit from them. Soon, all that remained of the Nomu was a pile of ashes. As they turned to face Shigaraki's furious expression, a thunderous sound echoed through the area, and standing on top of the stairs was 𝐼𝐻 himself. You cheated. You're supposed to be quirkless. A quirkless nobody. Shigaraki launched into a lengthy tirade about how the protagonist had been quirkless for 2 years, while 𝐼𝐻 walked beside them, offering quiet encouragement. The protagonist smiled, glancing at their father, who was securely wrapped up thanks to their first family. With a chuckle, they finally expressed a long-held longing to tell Shigaraki to be quiet. They confidently stated that Shigaraki's transportation had betrayed him, ensuring he wouldn't escape from jail again. The protagonist reveled in the moment, explaining how they had effectively neutralized the Nomu, leaving Shigaraki unable to fight 𝐼𝐻. Shigaraki, furious, charged at them, but the protagonist activated their black WHP, ensnaring him with tendrils that held him in place. They declared that Tomura Shigaraki was under arrest for self-proclaimed charges of kidnapping them from ages 4 to 7, torturing them during that time, executing all for one's plans, damaging you, property, and multiple counts of murder. They emphasized that everything said could be used against him in interrogation and that he had no right to a lawyer, as they could testify to the truth of the charges. As the protagonist lifted Shigaraki off the ground and moved toward the front door, 𝐼𝐻 and the 3 villains who had carried their father followed closely behind. With a playful tone, they bid Shigaraki goodnight, hitting his pressure point to render him unconscious. They then asked Kurogiri to warp the pro heroes to their location, and a massive warp gate opened, allowing a multitude of pro heroes and police to arrive. The protagonist introduced Shigaraki as the leader of the attack and informed the heroes that Shota Aizawa, also known as Eraserhead, and 13 were injured and required medical assistance. They handed over Shigaraki to the authorities, and Tsukachi stepped forward to shake their hand, greeting them warmly. The protagonist grimaced slightly but managed a smile in return. 𝐼𝐻, looking puzzled, asked if the protagonist knew Tsukachi. Just as they were about to respond, they felt 2 familiar forces knock them to the ground. Laughing, they embraced the 2 figures who had come to their aid. The protagonist playfully posed a question to the audience, asking them to guess who had arrived. The options included 𝐷𝐷𝐵, Himiko Toga, Hitoshi 𝗫𝐶, and Shoto Todoroki, inviting speculation on which combination of 2 it was. Both 𝗫𝐶 and Todoroki helped the protagonist to their feet, and as they continued to laugh, Todoroki affectionately kissed the top of their head while 𝗫𝐶 held on tightly. The protagonist smiled and pulled them into another hug, apologizing for any worry they had caused. Todoroki reassured them that it was okay, eliciting a smile in response. The protagonist then informed everyone that they had received permission to use their quirk from Eraserhead and approached the police, who nodded in understanding. Together, they exited the USD. The following hours were tedious. The protagonist sat in a chair for 3 hours, underwent an hour of interrogation, and then spent time in Tsukachi's office discussing various matters while he worked. Eventually, their father arrived to pick them up, along with Hitoshi and Todoroki. Since Todoroki was allowed to stay the night again, they all went straight to bed upon arriving home, utterly exhausted both physically and mentally. They exchanged goodnights, retreated to their rooms, and fell asleep immediately. Izuku Yamazawa felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety as he looked up at Officer Tamakawa, who had often looked after him during his time in the holding cells. Tamakawa's voice was light-hearted as he remarked on Izuku's presence there. Izuku rubbed the nape of his neck, admitting that he didn't particularly enjoy waiting in confinement. Tamakawa chuckled and pulled out the keys to Izuku's personal holding cell, informing him that his father was waiting for him in the lobby, along with his classmates. Izuku's expression shifted to one of concern at the mention of his peers. He stood up, placing a hand on his face, and inquired about 𝐷𝐵, Toga, and Kuro. Tamakawa reassured him that they wouldn't face severe consequences for their actions, which brought a sigh of relief from Izuku. As Tamakawa led him into the lobby, he announced Izuku's arrival, earning curious glances from everyone present. Izuku protested against being labeled a problem child, and he requested to have the ℔𝐻𝑁𝐷𝐶FFS removed. Tamakawa complied, and Izuku felt a wave of relief wash over him as he rubbed his sore wrists. Ida, one of his classmates, admonished him for being accustomed to ℔𝐻𝑁𝐷𝐶FFS, emphasizing that it was unprofessional and unheroic. Izuku sighed, lowering his head, but the atmosphere lightened when another officer yelled for Tamakawa to quiet down. Tamakawa responded with a playful jab, causing Izuku to chuckle. Tanuma, another officer, confronted Izuku with a growl, but Izuku, undeterred, suggested that Tanuma should address his anger issues instead of picking a fight with someone on the same side. With a smirk, Izuku challenged Tanuma, playfully grabbing him and pushing him against the wall. He asked Tamakawa if he could have the ℔𝐻𝑁𝐷𝐶FFS, letting a mischievous aura radiate from him. Tanuma vehemently refused, to which Izuku feigned ignorance, teasingly flipping the ℔𝐻𝑁𝐷𝐶FFS open and enjoying the reaction it elicited from Tanuma. He lightened the mood with a humorous interruption, referencing a popular meme, which drew laughter from those who understood. However, the atmosphere shifted when Izuku heard his father's voice calling for him. He turned around, feeling tension rise as he realized Tanuma was still behind him. Stuttering, he greeted his father, who narrowed his eyes, signaling that he would not be pleased with Izuku's actions. As he approached his father, Kirishima called out, demanding an explanation for why Izuku had been brought to the station. Izuku rubbed his neck, admitting that he couldn't share the details at that moment. Just then, the police commissioner general entered the room, and Izuku felt a wave of dread. He and his father bowed in respect, and the commissioner dismissed them, instructing them to stand. He expressed his indifference toward Izuku's feelings and demanded an explanation of the events that had transpired. Izuku felt a knot in his stomach as he prepared to recount the incident. He explained that what began as a normal field trip for the Hero Corps students devolved into chaos when Kurojirai transported the villain Tomura Shigaraki and other low-ranking villains to the USJ. After jumping down the stairs with Aizawa-sensei, Izuku noticed that his classmates were being scattered around the area. As he fought against the low-ranking villains, he saw his classmates gradually regrouping near the doors. When Shigaraki targeted Aizawa, Izuku felt a surge of panic and rushed in to help, recalling painful memories from his past. In a moment of desperation, he revealed that he had discovered a new way to use his quirk, which he called Fire WHPS, allowing him to increase the temperature of his attacks. This newfound ability enabled him to defeat the Nomu before All Might arrived. After capturing Shigaraki, Kurojirai brought the heroes to assist, leading to his eventual apprehension by the authorities. The commissioner listened intently before granting Izuku permission to leave, but not without advising him to explain his vigilante actions to his classmates. The tension broke when one of his classmates exclaimed in disbelief at the revelation. Izuku's father suggested they head to his house so Izuku could clarify everything, knowing that their teacher 𝗭𝐿 would not be pleased with the situation. The group agreed, and as they stepped outside, they were met by the presence of all the UA teachers. Izuku smiled softly and rubbed the nape of his neck as his friends crossed their arms and shook their heads. He offered an apologetic grin and got into the car when Nemuri sighed and told him to do so. At the house, everyone was gathered in the living room, their eyes fixed on him, filled with questions, even some of the teachers. Izuku could sense their confusion and decided to address it. He hesitated before speaking, asking them to raise their hands for questions. As arms shot up, he called on Mina first. Mina leaned forward, curiosity evident in her expression. She asked if he was really a vigilante. Izuku confirmed that he was indeed the vigilante known as the Black Fox, and gasps echoed around the room. Kirishima then asked if he had ever killed someone. The room fell silent, and Izuku reassured him that he had never taken a life, though he had sent some people to the hospital. A collective sigh of relief followed. Shoji then inquired why Izuku had chosen to become a vigilante. His expression hardened, and the room quieted. He looked down, recalling the events of his past. Toshi and Roki stood up and sat next to him for support. When Roki asked if he was sure about sharing his story, Izuku gave a small, nervous smile and replied that he was going to do it anyway. Both friends hugged him, promising to stay by his side. Izuku turned back to his classmates, who were now even more confused. He began to recount his story, starting from when he was 4 years old. He explained how he had been diagnosed as Quirkless and subsequently kidnapped by the League of Villains. Gasps filled the room as he described his time in captivity, where he had to pretend to be emotionless while enduring harsh treatment from Shigaraki, who had trained him despite his lack of a quirk. He revealed that he had been rescued by heroes after 2 years, leading to his adoption by Yamada and Shota. The room erupted in disbelief when Yamada confirmed Izuku's story, explaining that he and Shota had officially adopted both Izuku and Hitoshi when they were 7. Minata's comment about his parents drew everyone's attention, and Izuku's demeanor shifted as he transformed physically, his hair darkening and his pupils widening. He calmly confronted Mineta, asking if he wanted to repeat his words. Everyone observed the fear on Shinso and Todoroki's faces as they moved closer to Yamada, realizing the gravity of the situation. Shinso warned the class about the consequences of homophobia, and they all nodded in agreement, visibly shaken. Mina nervously asked where Izuku and Mineta were, and Siro joked about hoping Izuku wouldn't harm Mineta. They waited anxiously until Izuku returned, looking normal but with clenched fists. Todoroki asked about Mineta's whereabouts, and Izuku assured him that Mineta was still alive, chuckling as he walked to the kitchen to wash his hands. When he returned, he smiled at Todoroki and affectionately kissed him on the cheek, saying he loved him. The class was stunned, and a chorus of surprised exclamations erupted as they processed the revelation that Izuku and Todoroki were dating. Izuku then asked Yamada for permission to take Todoroki and his siblings from their household, explaining his intentions. Yamada agreed, noting it could be a good opportunity for them to reconnect. Izuku smirked and dashed out the door, leaving everyone in shock. Moments later, Izuku returned, dragging the confused Todoroki siblings behind him. He pleaded for them to understand, but a shadowy figure beside him remained unyielding. Shoto recognized the figure and called out, freezing everyone in the room. As Shoto approached, he asked if it was really Tuya. The figure confirmed it, and Shoto urged him to step out of the shadows. Everyone watched in anticipation as the figure revealed himself to be 𝗶𝗶, the former D-ranked villain. Natsuo gasped, finally speaking up as everyone processed the shocking revelation. Natsuo wondered why Shoto was asking about 𝗶𝗶. Shoto explained that he had met 𝗶𝗶 a while ago during a nighttime walk. 𝗶𝗶 had appeared injured, so Shoto had brought him home to help. Since then, they had continued to talk. Natsuo shrugged and approached 𝗶𝗶, acknowledging him as his brother. 𝗶𝗶 smiled slightly, and all the Todoroki siblings gathered around him for a warm group hug. Izuku chuckled, feeling pleased with his decision to bring 𝗶𝗶 along. Shoto thanked Izuku and, with a smile, accepted a hug from him. Mina squealed at the sight, causing Shoto to blush and hide his face in Izuku's neck. Izuku agreed with Mina, sharing a smile and a sigh. When Izuku woke up, he found himself in bed with Roki peacefully resting on his chest. He smiled at the adorable sight and gently brushed Roki's hair away from his face. Roki stirred and murmured Izuku's name, making Izuku's face turn as red as Kirishima's hair. He felt overwhelmed by how cute Roki was. Izuku groaned, realizing he didn't deserve someone so wonderful. As Roki moved, Izuku whispered a morning greeting, watching him nuzzle closer. Suddenly, a loud voice interrupted them, causing Izuku to end up on the floor with Roki on top of him. He groaned and playfully used his quirk to cover his father's face, sending a glare in his direction. His father yelped and quickly retreated down the hallway. Izuku apologized for the interruption, expressing his annoyance at his father's antics. Roki reassured him that it was okay, and Izuku felt a surge of happiness when Roki hugged him tightly, nuzzling into his neck. They shared a light-hearted moment, and Izuku teased Roki about his adorableness, which made Roki blush even more. Toshi appeared, smirking at them, and Izuku playfully suggested he should leave and close the door behind him. With a wink, he leaned in to kiss Roki, who was caught off guard when the door slammed shut. They both burst into laughter, and Roki playfully complained about Izuku's laughter. Izuku leaned in closer, teasing Roki with a nickname that made him blush even more before he left the room, flustered. As Izuku got ready for the day, he walked into the kitchen and noticed 2 blushing teens and 2 adults chuckling. He guessed that Toshi and Roki had been talking, which only made Roki turn even redder. His father praised him for being bold, and Izuku thanked him, suggesting it was time to head to school. Everyone began to tidy up, and soon they were all in the car, on their way to U. After the unexpected events in his room, Todoroki stepped into the living room and spotted 𝗫𝐿 with his head resting on the table. He acknowledged the surprise they both felt. Yamada and Aizawa entered the room, and Yamada asked if they were okay. Todoroki was surprised to see Aizawa, who had insisted on leaving the hospital. Yamada humorously mimicked Aizawa's words, causing 𝗫𝐿 to chuckle. Yamada then inquired about their embarrassment, prompting Todoroki to freeze and blush as he looked away. 𝗫𝐿 explained how he had provoked Izuku, leading to a surprising moment that had left them both startled. Laughter erupted from Yamada and Aizawa, while Todoroki felt his face heat up even more. Izuku, overhearing the conversation, teased them, and Yamada praised Izuku for his boldness. Izuku then reminded everyone that his classmates now knew about his vigilante activities, and with that thought, they all prepared to leave for school. When I walked through the U gates, I immediately put Roki on my back and hurried into the school, racing all the way to our classroom. With a slight laugh, I pushed open the door with my foot and stepped inside, Roki still on my back. Roki mumbled that I could put him down now, blushing. I apologized and knelt down, allowing him to hop off. A fake cough caught our attention, and we turned to find our entire class staring at us. I chuckled nervously, rubbing the back of my neck. The class erupted in a chorus of exaggerated greetings, which startled me, causing me to jump back just as an explosion erupted nearby. I instinctively grabbed the wrist of the culprit and pushed them against the wall, but upon realizing it was 𝐾𝐿, I quickly released him. I apologized, but he merely turned away, growling menacingly. Fortunately, Dad walked in just then and separated us. I thanked him and headed to my seat, but Kirishima caught my attention. He pointed out that Aizawa-sensei was supposed to be recovering in a hospital bed, piquing my interest. I glanced at Dad, waiting for his response. Dad paused, finally noticing my intense gaze, and explained that Recovery Girl had been a bit too enthusiastic with his recovery. He was mostly healed and had been cleared to teach, but he needed to be careful. I smiled in approval and took my seat as Dad mumbled something and began class. By the end of the lesson, Dad had curled up in his sleeping bag, taking a nap. I snickered at him but looked up when I heard Uraraka's surprised voice. She greeted the students crowded around the door, who frowned in response. My attention shifted to Kaminari, who was talking to Kirishima about the crowd. 𝐾𝐿 shoved me aside, declaring that they were scouting out competitions since we were the class that had defeated a group of villains. He growled at the students outside, who erupted in anger, while our class expressed their annoyance. One of the students from outside remarked on the disappointing attitude of Class 1A, suggesting that if this was how we were going to act, winning would be easy. They declared it a declaration of war and acknowledged 𝗫𝐿, who looked visibly shaken. I rushed over to him, hugging him tightly to support him. The student continued, taunting me about whether I was still weak, but since I was in Class 1, I should be stronger now. With a twisted smile, they walked away as our class, including 𝐾𝐿, looked at us for answers. After a moment of silence, Kaminari broke it, demanding to know who that was. Toshi and I shivered and looked up at the class, answering simultaneously that it was our ex-best friend, 𝐒𝐮𝐬 𝐃𝐞𝐭𝐚𝐢𝐥𝐬. 𝐾𝐿 had been our best friend for about 6 years before the incident occurred. I sensed that Hitoshi wasn't ready to discuss it yet, but I promised to answer all their questions after school. I suggested we go to my house to talk, and Dad nodded, looking worried. I smiled at him and walked into the hallway, still helping Toshi along the way. I whispered to him, asking if he wanted to go to Papa's room, and he hurriedly nodded. This only heightened my worries as I quickened my pace. I knocked softly on Papa's door, asking if we could come in. His expression changed instantly as he rushed over to help us inside. He bombarded us with questions about what had happened and if we were okay. Overwhelmed, we both started to cry and hugged him tightly. Seeing his conflicted expression, I looked up with pleading eyes, and he seemed to understand what to do. He assured us it was okay not to share everything right away but asked if we could tell him what happened. I nodded against his drenched jacket, lifting my head to speak while Toshi continued to cling to him. I explained that we had encountered 𝐒𝐮𝐬 𝐃𝐞𝐭𝐚𝐢𝐥𝐬 in The anger in Papa's eyes was unmistakable. He growled about 𝐒𝐮𝐬 allowing someone like her into the school and picked Toshi up, setting him next to me. Toshi held onto me tightly as I teared up a little. Papa promised to get 𝐿𝐿 and 𝐿𝐿 and then confront 𝐒𝐮𝐬. He asked if we would be okay for a little while, and I assured him that I had Toshi and would be fine. Papa nodded and hurried out of the room, darting down the hallway. I turned to Toshi, reassuring him that everything would be all right. Papa would take care of it, and 𝐾𝐿 wouldn't be around anymore. Toshi nodded, and I hugged him tighter as I waited for Dad and 𝐿𝐿 to arrive. Suddenly, 𝐿𝐿 and Dad burst through the door, rushing over as soon as they saw our condition. 𝐿𝐿 pulled me into a tight hug while Dad embraced Toshi. 𝐿𝐿 asked if we were okay and why that person had affected us so deeply. He had done something when they were kids that caused a lot of distress. Yamada whimpered into 𝐿𝐿's chest as 𝐿𝐿 rubbed her back, reassuring her that everything would be okay. He told her that the person who had hurt her would no longer be able to do so. A small smile crept onto Yamada's face as she hugged 𝐿𝐿 tighter, grateful for his support. She loosened her grip and turned to see her dad and Toshi asleep. A chuckle escaped her lips as she cuddled closer to 𝐿𝐿, who gently combed his fingers through her hair. Eventually, she became comfortable enough to drift off to sleep in his arms. Yamada had left Izuku and Toshi with the others and sprinted directly to 𝐒𝐮𝐬's office. As she reached the door, it swung open to reveal 𝐒𝐮𝐬 sitting behind his desk with a welcoming smile. He asked how he could help, but Yamada stomped into the room, a low growl escaping her throat. She demanded that 𝐒𝐮𝐬 call 𝐒𝐮𝐬 𝐃𝐞𝐭𝐚 in for immediate expulsion. 𝐒𝐮𝐬's expression shifted to confusion as he leaned forward, asking for an explanation. Yamada instructed him to check the classroom camera for answers, her frustration evident. 𝐒𝐮𝐬, maintaining his calm demeanor, inquired why the children were crying in the arms of their father and boyfriend. Yamada's anger intensified as she explained that Izuku, Hitoshi, and 𝐾𝐿 shared a troubling past that had led to frequent panic attacks due to 𝐾𝐿's actions. They had only begun to heal, but seeing her again had triggered painful memories. Yamada noted that they would likely fall asleep soon, and as if on cue, 𝐿𝐿 and Hitoshi dozed off in each other's arms. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 acknowledged that something serious had occurred and asked Yamada to elaborate. A grin briefly appeared on her face before she adopted a serious expression. She expressed her willingness to share the story but insisted it was not hers to tell. When the children were ready, she would invite 𝐒𝐮𝐬 to hear it. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 agreed but stipulated that 𝐾𝐿 would not be expelled until he understood the situation. He promised to keep her away from the boys in the meantime. Yamada thanked 𝐒𝐮𝐬 and left the room, surprised by the outcome. Pain coursed through Yamada's neck, back, and head as she groaned, trying to stand. Just as she shifted, something pulled her back down, causing her to bump against a hard surface. She turned to find her boyfriend peacefully asleep beside her. A smile crept onto her face as she brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, marveling at how calm he looked while sleeping. She sighed, glancing up at her father, feeling grateful to see him. Yamada shared that while they had been asleep, she had made a deal with Principal 𝐒𝐮𝐬 regarding 𝐾𝐿's punishment. She hoped 𝐒𝐮𝐬 would expel her for what she had done. Suddenly, a realization hit her, and she bolted upright, excitement coursing through her. She rushed to her father, thanking him loudly, which startled both Dad and Toshi awake. When they asked what was happening, Yamada eagerly explained that 𝐒𝐮𝐬 would face consequences once she and Toshi were ready to tell 𝐒𝐮𝐬 the truth. Toshi sprang up and dashed out the door, calling for Yamada to follow. They ran for 10 minutes until they reached 𝐒𝐮𝐬's office. Toshi nodded, and Yamada raised her arm to knock on the door. With 3 firm knocks, they awaited a response, and soon heard 𝐒𝐮𝐬's invitation to enter. Upon entering, they found 𝐒𝐮𝐬 already expecting them, admiring their determination. He offered them tea, which they gladly accepted, knowing it was a treat they couldn't refuse. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 inquired if they were ready to explain their panic attack upon seeing 𝐒𝐮𝐬. Yamada flinched but met his gaze with determination, ready to share their story. In a flashback, Izuku and Hitoshi were 8 years old, running around the playground when suddenly a foot emerged from a bush, causing Izuku to tumble and fall. Hitoshi rushed back to his friend, concerned for his well-being. Izuku reassured him, though tears threatened to spill as he pushed himself back up, feeling a sting from the fall. The story continued, leaving a sense of anticipation for what would unfold next. "Ha, are you going to cry, Wimpy Deku?" Someone emerged from the bushes, laughing. Hitoshi glared at the person now known as 𝐒𝐮𝐬. "Why did you do that?" he demanded. "Oh come on, Hitoshi. It was just a joke," 𝐒𝐮𝐬 chuckled, glancing behind her as 3 more figures stepped into view. Well, look what we have here. It's pathetic Deku." Bakugo and his 2 friends smirked at both Izuku and Hitoshi. Izuku greeted Bakugo with a bright smile, sitting up straight. "Hi, Kaken. How are you?" Suddenly, he screamed in surprise as a small explosion erupted in front of him. "Stop it, Bakugo!" Hitoshi shouted, trying to rush to Izuku's side, but he was held back by 2 pairs of arms. "Let me go!" Hitoshi struggled, only to be thrown to the ground beside Izuku. "Kaken, why did you hurt Toshi?" Izuku asked, standing protectively in front of Hitoshi with his arms spread wide. "Deku, what do you think you're doing? Do you really believe you can win against Bakugo? He's going to take you down, and you know what? I think I'll join him," 𝐒𝐮𝐬 grinned as they all slowly advanced. The next 30 minutes felt like an endless cycle of torment. Izuku closed his eyes as Bakugo stepped back with a satisfied smile. "That will teach them, neither of them will ever be a hero," Bakugo chuckled, signaling for the others to follow him. They nodded and turned to leave, unaware that Hitoshi was getting back on his feet. "𝐿𝐴𝐼. Izuku." Hitoshi gasped, turning around to find Izuku lying still, eyes closed, his chest rising and falling slowly. "No." Hitoshi rushed to Izuku's side, placing his fingers on Izuku's wrist and sighing in relief as he felt a pulse. "I need to get to Dad," he realized, picking up Izuku. Hitoshi winced as pain shot through his body but pushed it aside. "Ignore the pain. You can do it," he murmured to himself as he lifted Izuku into his arms and ran toward his house. An hour later, both Izuku and Hitoshi were at the hospital. Hitoshi was in stable condition, but Izuku's situation was much more serious. He had multiple broken bones, some internal bleeding, and a major concussion that left him in a small coma. The Yamazawa family chose to keep the incident quiet, as Izuku, upon waking, decided he didn't want Bakugo or 𝐒𝐮𝐬 to face consequences. However, both boys were deeply affected and transferred to a different school, seeking therapy. Yet, when they entered middle school, they encountered Bakugo again, and the bullying resumed. "So that's what happened. I think I understand your reactions a bit more now," 𝐒𝐮𝐬 said with a smile. "Now that I know the situation, I would like you 2 to leave my office so I can decide on an appropriate punishment for 𝐒𝐮𝐬." Both Shinso and Yamazawa left the room, visibly shaken by the story, as they hugged each other for comfort. 𝐒𝐮𝐬's smile faded as he called over the intercom, requesting 𝐒𝐮𝐬 to come to his office. "You made a poor choice messing with that family, kid," he thought to himself. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 looked up in confusion when she heard her name called. As her classmates turned to look at her, she stood up and walked toward the door after receiving permission from her teacher. She walked down the hallway with a slight skip, recalling the events of second period. Their faces were so priceless. "I can't wait to get back at them," she chuckled. As she turned a corner, She suddenly fell to the floor. She was about to shout at the person who knocked her over when she recognized a hero she admired. "Oh, I'm sorry, young student. I didn't mean to bump into you. Let me help you up," the hero said, extending a hand. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 accepted the help, feeling grateful. "Thank you, 𝐼𝐻𝐬. I'm not hurt, but I'm really happy to meet you. You're one of my biggest inspirations. Could I please have your autograph?" she asked, smiling brightly. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 nodded in agreement, but before he could respond further, 𝐒𝐮𝐬's voice echoed through the hallway, instructing 𝐼𝐻𝐬 to come to his office. "I'm sorry, young 𝐻𝐻𝐬, but it seems we both need to hurry." "Goodbye," 𝐼𝐻𝐬 said, rushing down the hallway. 𝐻𝐻𝐬 sighed and continued toward 𝐒𝐮𝐬's office. When she arrived, the door swung open to reveal 𝐒𝐮𝐬 sitting calmly at his desk. "Hello, 𝐻𝐻𝐬. Would you like some tea?" he asked. She nodded, feeling a bit nervous. "Thank you for waiting. Now we can discuss something important," 𝐒𝐮𝐬 said, noticing her expression change. "What would you like to talk about, sir?" 𝐻𝐻𝐬 asked, her voice shaking slightly. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 opened his computer and pulled up footage of Yamazawa and 𝗀𝐿 looking distressed after their encounter with her. "Can you explain why they were crying uncontrollably after meeting you?" he asked, a smile on his face as he turned the screen toward her. 𝐻𝐻𝐬's cheerful demeanor faded as she watched the video. "How would I know? I barely knew them, I only met them in middle school," she replied, her tone defensive. 𝐒𝐮𝐬's expression shifted as he felt irritation rise. "Could you repeat that?" he asked, maintaining a calm facade. "I barely knew them, I met them in middle school," 𝐻𝐻𝐬 said again, rolling her eyes. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 suppressed a chuckle, deciding to call someone for assistance. "Hello, Yamada. Can you come down? I have someone for you," he said, hanging up the phone and leaving 𝐻𝐻𝐬 puzzled. "Just wait a few seconds, he'll be here any moment," the narrator said, and just 3 seconds later, the door swung open, revealing Izuku and Yamada. The narrator smiled, acknowledging Izuku's presence. "I'll leave him to you." Turning to 𝐻𝐻𝐬, the narrator delivered the news. "𝐻𝐻𝐬, 𝐻𝐻𝐬, you are now expelled from UA for lying about your past and harassing 2 students to the point of causing them distress." The horror on 𝐻𝐻𝐬's face elicited a chuckle from the narrator as Izuku and Yamada seized 𝐻𝐻𝐬 by the arms and skirted her out of the room. The narrator couldn't help but mutter, "That was fun." When Izuku and Toshi stepped out of 𝐒𝐮𝐬's office, they both sighed and headed back to class. Before they could enter, Dad emerged from the room and stood before them. "You two can go home if you like," he said with a smile, placing a hand on their shoulders. Izuku exchanged a glance with Toshi, and they nodded in unison. "No, we're okay to stay," Izuku replied, smiling at Dad, who sighed in response. Suddenly, the announcement came over the intercom. "Can 𝐻𝐻𝐬, 𝐻𝐻𝐬 please come to Principal 𝐒𝐮𝐬's office?" Both Izuku and Toshi started to chuckle. "Well, hopefully she gets what she deserves," Dad grinned, causing their laughter to grow. "Thanks, Dad," Toshi said. Dad smiled back and opened the door, allowing them to enter. As soon as they walked into the room, a flurry of questions bombarded them. "Why were you gone for so long?" Kaminari asked. "Where did you go?" Kirishima inquired. "Are you okay?" Uraraka added. "Why was 𝐻𝐻𝐬 called to 𝐒𝐮𝐬?" 𝗟𝗏 wondered. Finally, 𝗂𝐻𝐻𝐬 shouted, "Where were you?" causing everyone to fall silent. Izuku responded, "Well, 𝗂𝐻𝐬, both of us were in Principal 𝐒𝐮𝐬's office telling him about 𝐻𝐻𝐬 and what she did to us." Toshi poked 𝗂𝐻𝐬 playfully and walked to his desk, with Izuku chuckling as he followed. The announcement echoed again. 𝐻𝐻𝐬, 𝐻𝐻𝐬 to Principal 𝐒𝐮𝐬's office now, and all might go to class. Both Izuku and Toshi burst into laughter at that. The rest of the day passed more calmly, except for when Papa rushed into the room, followed closely by Dad. Everyone looked confused until they heard the distant sounds of commotion. The narrator smiled for the rest of the day after that. "Well, that was a semi-good day," they remarked while walking with Sho, Uraraka, Ida, and Toshi. Ida protested, "A good day? It literally sounded like someone was in trouble. I was half tempted to run out of the class and try to stop it." This caused Toshi, Sho, and the narrator to chuckle. "Yeah, but that was 𝐻𝐻𝐬 screaming, so we're good," the narrator reassured him, though it seemed to have little effect as Ida's face turned even redder. 10 minutes later, the narrator told Ida to calm down, adding, "Yes, she deserved it." When Izuku, Hitoshi, Aizawa, and Yamada arrived home, Izuku immediately hugged Yamada with a big smile on his face. "Thank you," he exclaimed into Yamada's shirt. Yamada looked at his husband and son, a small smile forming on his face. "Anytime, problem child." Aizawa chuckled and released Hitoshi, opening his arms for Izuku to hug him. Hitoshi jogged over to Yamada for a hug as well. "Alright, hug time is over. It's time for training," Aizawa announced with a grin. Both Izuku and Hitoshi exchanged determined glances. "That's what I like to see," Yamada said, walking over to Aizawa and giving him a quick kiss on the cheek. Izuku chuckled as Hitoshi made a playful gagging noise. Okay, outside in 10 minutes. Go get changed," Aizawa instructed. 10 minutes later, Izuku, Hitoshi, Aizawa, and Yamada were all outside, dressed in leggings and loose tank tops. "Alright, Izuku, you and Mike are going to spar. Take it easy on Mike, and one last thing. No quirks," Aizawa said, glancing at Yamada with concern. Yamada sighed. "Don't look at me like that. You need to learn how to fight, and you need to build some muscles to protect yourself if you can't use your quirk. Don't be so dependent on it." Yamada nodded at Aizawa in agreement. "Aizu, please go easy on me," Mike said. Izuku chuckled, taking his fighting stance with a glint in his eyes. "No promises, Papa." Aizawa and Hitoshi exchanged looks and got into position as Aizawa counted down. 3, 2, 1, go. As the command was given, the 4 Yamazawas rushed forward, each attacking their assigned partner. Among them, Izuku and Aizawa were the most likely to win. Izuku, for obvious reasons, and Aizawa, due to his experience in anticipating Hitoshi's moves. The battles were intense in their own ways. Izuku and Yamada's match saw Yamada struggling to keep pace with his son while wrestling with the urge to use his quirk. Izuku found it challenging to hold back, knowing that if he didn't, he might unintentionally hurt his dad. Meanwhile, Aizawa and Hitoshi had a clean match, and just 2 minutes in, Aizawa had Hitoshi on the ground in a hold. "Alright, can you get off me now, Dad?" Hitoshi groaned beneath him. Aizawa grunted in response and released his son, offering him a hand to help him up. Both of them turned to see Izuku and Yamada, who were locked in their own struggle. Aizawa chuckled while Hitoshi sighed. Izuku noticed his father's subtle movements and jumped back just in time as Yamada's leg swung out, missing him by inches. With a smirk, Izuku rushed forward, grabbing Yamada's leg before he could pull it back, dragging him down into a position that made Yamada concede almost immediately. Finally, "Are you okay, Papa?" Izuku asked, helping Yamada up. "I'm good, Aizu." "Good fight though," Yamada replied with a smile, and Izuku sighed, returning the smile. "Alright, Izuku, Hitoshi, both of you go get a shower and get ready for lunch. Also, Izuku, Todoroki is coming over for lunch," Aizawa informed them. Izuku's face lit up with excitement. He yelled with enthusiasm and dashed inside, Hitoshi right behind him. Aizawa sighed, sinking into the couch, feeling relieved to have a moment of peace. Yamada chuckled, sitting beside him, agreeing with the sentiment. Later in the day, 2 of the Yamazawas were relaxing in the living room when the doorbell rang. Izuku jumped up, announcing he would get it, and rushed to the door with a bright smile. However, his expression faltered when he saw Todoroki standing there, accompanied by 𝗟𝗏, the last person he wanted to see. He forced a smile as he welcomed them in, internally screaming, "Dad, Papa, Todoroki is here, and he brought 𝗟𝗏," he called out, swearing he heard all 3 family members mutter under their breath. "𝗟𝗏, it's nice to see you," Yamada greeted as he emerged from the kitchen. "Yes, Shoto mentioned he was invited to lunch, so I came along to ensure he had the right food. I assume you were invited as well, present Mike." Izuku glanced at Todoroki, who offered an apologetic look. "That's quite all right, 𝗟𝗏, and yes, I was invited too," Yamada replied, smiling at Aizawa, who had just entered the room. "Oh, Eraserhead, so this is your house?" 𝗟𝗏 inquired, stepping forward. "Yes, this is my house. Izuku is my son, and 𝗀𝐻𝐼𝐸, Mike, and Todoroki were invited since they are close to him. 𝗟𝐿 nodded and turned to Todoroki. Shoto, go help Eraserhead with the plating. Yamazawa, can you show me where I can wait until the food is ready? Izuku felt a slight irritation but eventually guided 𝗟𝐿 to the living room. This is the living room, you can stay here until the food is done, 𝗟𝐿. Now, if you'll excuse me, Hitoshi, can you come with me for a moment? Hitoshi nodded and followed Izuku out. I'm really sorry, Izuku. He said I wouldn't be able to come if he didn't come with me, Todoroki expressed, hugging Izuku apologetically. Izuku reassured him that it wasn't his fault. He kissed Todoroki's forehead and turned to his dad's. Dad, Papa, is the food almost ready? Yamada nodded in response. Yes, it's nearly done. We just need to set the table. Izuku nodded, kissed Todoroki on the cheek, and left the room to help his dad. About 10 minutes later, the food was ready on the table. All right, 𝗟𝐿, the food is ready to eat, Izuku announced as he walked into the living room, with 𝗟𝐿 following closely behind. I hope you all enjoy the meal, Aizawa said as everyone took their seats and began to eat. Shoto, no bread, 𝗟𝐿 said, grabbing Todoroki's wrist just as he reached for a piece of bread. Yes, father, Todoroki replied in a monotone voice, causing Izuku to flinch but remain calm. So, Eraserhead, why did you invite my son again? 𝗟𝐿 asked, looking at Aizawa, who continued eating without looking up. After a moment, he replied, as I mentioned before, I invited Todoroki because he is friends with my son. 𝗟𝐿's expression shifted to one of disbelief. My son does not have friends, so I don't understand why you would assume that. Everyone's attention turned to Izuku, who stood up. Dad, can I say something? Also, do I have permission to do that? Aizawa grinned and nodded. Izuku's face transformed into a mischievous grin as he approached 𝗟𝐿. NG Todoroki, please leave the Yamazawa property. If you do not leave in the next minute, I have permission to make you leave. Also, Shoto will not be leaving as he has permission to stay here. You do not, so please go. 𝗟𝐿 stood up abruptly, causing his chair to topple backward. You do not have the right to speak to me like that. You are just a student. Izuku's grin widened as he activated his quirk, using it to restrain 𝗟𝐿 while Aizawa nullified his flames. I would say sorry, but I don't mean it. Goodbye, 𝗟𝐿, Izuku said, smiling as he pushed the eldest Todoroki out the front door and shut it behind him. Finally, I can stop pretending to be polite, Hitoshi chuckled. Todoroki jumped onto Izuku, causing him to stumble but quickly regain his balance. Hey, Sho, he laughed as his boyfriend snuggled into his neck. All right, I guess that means it's time for me to head to my bedroom, Izuku said, bidding goodnight to everyone. Izuku opened his bedroom door and stepped inside. He greeted Todoroki softly, rubbing his back gently. Hearing a mumble, he assumed Todoroki was tired. After closing the door, he climbed into bed, cuddling up to him. Good night, Sho, he whispered. Night, Aizu, Todoroki replied. The next morning, Izuku groaned as Toshi burst through the door, banging two pans together and yelling for him to get up. He covered his ears and shifted closer to Todoroki. Toshi insisted he wouldn't stop until Izuku got up. Finally, Izuku yelled in frustration, using his quirk to push Toshi out of the room. Finally, he heard Todoroki sigh, and he smiled at him before attempting to get out of bed. However, Todoroki's grip around his waist was surprisingly strong. Sho, we need to get up. If we don't, Toshi will come back in here and annoy us to the point of wanting to hide, Izuku explained, which made Todoroki loosen his hold, allowing Izuku to stand and grab an outfit from his closet. He felt Todoroki's gaze on him, causing him to chuckle and turn around just as he removed his shirt. What? Do you like what you see? He teased, laughing at Todoroki's surprised expression before heading to the bathroom. As Izuku entered the bathroom, Todoroki sat there, momentarily stunned that his boyfriend had noticed him staring. He quickly recovered and grabbed an outfit he had left over from a previous stay, as he often stayed over due to his reluctance to return home. When both boys finished getting dressed, they walked out of Izuku's room and into the kitchen, where Mike, Aizawa, and Hitoshi were enjoying the breakfast Aizawa had prepared for them. Izuku greeted his family warmly, and Shoto smiled at them. Aizawa returned the greeting as both boys sat down to serve themselves. Izuku thanked his father before starting to eat. After they finished their meal, they cleaned up and got ready to leave for UA. Yamada asked the teenagers if they were ready to go as they walked out of the house and into the car. Hitoshi confirmed that they were all set, and Yamada nodded, starting the car. Upon arriving at UA, they exited the vehicle and headed into the school, parting ways as the adults went to the staff lounge and the students made their way to Class 1A. When the three boys entered their classroom, they noticed Ida, Momo, Bakugo, and Shoji were the only other students present, though there were likely a couple more hidden from view. The mystery of who else was in the class lingered in the air. Izuku, 𝗫𝐻, and Todoroki entered the room, but Izuku suddenly paused, drawing the attention of his friends. Todoroki began to ask if Izuku was okay but stopped when he noticed what had caught his boyfriend's eye. The others soon followed his gaze to the corner, revealing two unexpected figures. Both boys greeted Shoto and Izuku with wide smiles as they ran over and jumped onto 𝗟𝗶𝗸, who caught them, surprising everyone. Another figure joined in, causing all four of them to tumble to the ground with laughter. Izuku responded warmly to Toga, who exclaimed their newfound freedom from a difficult situation. The class was still in shock, and Kaminari voiced his disbelief, questioning how it could have been so bad for them. Izuku and 𝗟𝗶𝗸 shot him a glare, prompting a nervous chuckle from Kaminari as he stepped back behind Kirishima, who was tense. Mina broke the silence, pointing out the presence of two former villains in the room, but the trio of former villains simply stood up with Todoroki and settled into a square of desks, engaging in conversation, much to the confusion of the rest of the class. 𝗫𝐻 urged everyone to stop staring, reminding them that the newcomers were human too and had feelings just like anyone else. Gradually, the class returned to their discussions. Izuku expressed his gratitude to 𝗫𝐻 for his support and took a seat next to 𝗟𝗶𝗸. He playfully asked the former villains what it was like being in a hero school after their past. 𝗟𝗶𝗸 smirked, teasing Izuku about being a former villain as well, to which Izuku clarified that he was a former vigilante, emphasizing the distinction. Toga hugged Izuku from behind, and the boys smiled at the camaraderie. She expressed her happiness at being reunited, but Izuku frowned, reflecting on how his mind had blocked out memories of them. Toga reassured him that the important thing was that he remembered them, and she hugged him tighter, playfully causing him to gasp for breath. After apologizing, she let go, and Izuku chuckled, assuring her he was used to it. As class time approached, Izuku excused himself to return to his desk, with 𝗫𝐻 following closely behind. Just as he settled in, Aizawa burst through the door, announcing that it was a no-question day and that their troubles were far from over. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone braced for more villain-related news, but Aizawa revealed that he was referring to the upcoming sports festival. A collective sigh of relief swept through the class. Mina raised a concern about the timing, questioning the wisdom of holding a festival so soon after a villain attack. Aizawa acknowledged her worry but emphasized the importance of demonstrating their resilience as heroes in training. Izuku chimed in, reinforcing that they needed to be prepared for villain encounters as part of their lives. Aizawa agreed, noting that even those who chose the path of underground heroes needed to remain vigilant. He then hinted at the need for code names, leaving the class curious about what was to come next. Today we're going to be choosing. Dad was interrupted as the door burst open, revealing the pro-hero Midnight, also known as Namuri Kiyama. She enthusiastically announced, code names. Everyone except 𝗟𝗶𝗸, 𝗫𝐻, and Izuku felt a wave of nervousness wash over them. Dad continued, explaining that they would be selecting their code names today, emphasizing the importance of this decision. He recounted a story about a hero who regretted his choice of Captain Celebrity, which he could never change. Midnight would be leading the class since Dad admitted he wasn't good at this kind of thing. He then settled into his sleeping bag on the floor, ready to nap. Izuku couldn't help but feel a twinge of jealousy at his father's ability to sleep so easily. As the students focused on their whiteboards, Izuku sensed their struggle to come up with names. He reflected on his own dilemma, realizing he couldn't use his vigilante name, and childhood names were out of the question due to embarrassment. his attention was drawn to Aoyama, who confidently strutted to the front. He declared, "I can't stop twinkling." Before Midnight could respond, prompting a collective facepalm from the class. Midnight surprisingly approved, suggesting a modification to "cannot stop twinkling," which left everyone in awe. Minutes later, Ishido approached the podium with a proud smile. Midnight asked for her name, and Ishido exclaimed, "The Acid Hero Alien Queen." Midnight immediately rejected it, comparing it to a creepy movie. The class was bewildered by the inconsistency in Midnight's reactions. Izuku chuckled to himself, returning his focus to his whiteboard, knowing he was less interested in his classmates' choices and more in finding his own name. As the selection continued, Midnight announced they only had 4 students left: Bakugo, Yamazawa, 𝐷𝗵𝐸, and Toga. Toga stood up, surprised that they could choose names. Midnight reassured her that they were in a rehabilitation program aimed at turning them into heroes. She tossed white bards to the ex-villains, who stared at them in disbelief. Bakugo growled impatiently, then stomped to the front and shouted, "Lord Explosion Murder." Midnight quickly dismissed it as too violent. Bakugo, frustrated, tried again with King Explosion Murder, but that was also rejected. He returned to his seat, grumbling. Toga and 𝐷𝗵𝐸 stood up together, revealing their names. Toga announced, "The Transform Hero, Toga," and 𝐷𝗵𝐸 stated, "The Cremating Hero, 𝐷𝗵𝐸." Izuku smiled at them and stood up, sharing his own choice, "The Blacklist Hero, 𝐿. 𝐷𝗵𝐸 wrapped an arm around Izuku's shoulders, and Midnight praised their selections. Finally, Bakugo, after a moment of contemplation, simply stated, "Dynamite." Midnight smiled, approving the name. With Dad still asleep, Midnight declared it a free PRD, reminding everyone not to wake him. Later, Izuku recalled a past incident during his patrol in an old town when he heard a scream. He rushed toward the sound, finding a middle-aged woman in distress. Concerned, he crouched beside her, asking if she was okay and what had happened. She struggled to speak, likely in shock, so he helped her sit down and encouraged her to breathe slowly. Once she calmed down, she revealed that she had witnessed a kidnapping. Izuku, taken aback, composed himself and introduced himself as Captain Danielle, asking for her name and any details about the assailant. But I think it was a male. He was around 6 feet tall, wearing a black hoodie, so I couldn't see his face. That's about it. Kate stopped talking and looked down. The captain smiled at her, expressing gratitude for the information. Kate looked up in shock, feeling a bit better. She smiled back at the captain, who then grabbed their phone and called for backup. After hanging up, the captain took a moment to survey the surroundings. They were in an alleyway connected to both sides of the street, with a trash can surrounded by black plastic bags. One side of the alley opened up to a street, while the opposite side led to another alley. The sidewalk was made of bricks, and the road was covered in black tar. The most noticeable thing was a small trail that led into the dark alley, hinting at something troubling. The captain instructed Kate to head to the UKPD and inform them that Captain Daniels had sent her regarding the recent call. Kate's expression hardened with determination as she nodded and stood up quickly. The captain, surprised by her resolve, nodded back and then dashed toward the BLD trail that ventured deeper into the alley. As the captain walked through the alley, the familiar sound of the radio crackled to life. A voice came through, asking for the captain's location. The captain responded, indicating they were in an alley in the old district, near the old costume shop. The rookie acknowledged the message, and the captain secured the radio back in their utility belt. Noticing the darkness closing in, the captain realized they needed more light to continue the search. They retrieved a flashlight from the utility belt and switched it on. Almost immediately, something unusual caught their eye: a small brownish-red dot on the ground, splattered against a wall around the corner. The captain put the flashlight back and drew their gun, ready for anything. Turning the corner, the captain encountered a shocking sight: a body lying on the ground, and the head was missing. Grimacing at the scene, the captain reported the discovery over the radio, mentioning they might have a description of the perpetrator. Kneeling beside the unfortunate victim, the captain noted the clean cut of the decapitation, indicating that this was not the perpetrator's first act of violence. Just then, a few colleagues from the department arrived with a body tarp. One of the officers acknowledged the captain and asked for the description of the suspect. After providing the information Kate had given, the captain requested one of the lieutenants to drive them back to the station. Upon arrival, the captain noticed Kate surrounded by officers who were questioning her. With a commanding tone, the captain instructed the officers to back off, causing them to straighten up and step away from Kate. One officer remained, and Kate introduced him as her son Jack. The captain was surprised but maintained composure, apologizing for the misunderstanding. They then asked Kate to accompany them to the interrogation room, assuring her that she was not in trouble. Kate requested that Jack join them, and the captain agreed. Once in the room, the captain began the questioning. They confirmed Kate's name and date of birth before asking her to recount what she had witnessed. Noticing her hesitation, the captain offered a reassuring smile, which prompted Kate to share her experience. She explained that she had been walking when a small boy ran into her after exiting the alley. She fell to the ground with him, noticing he was trembling. Concerned for his well-being, she tried to comfort him, but he only pointed at his throat. As the boy began to cry, Kate lifted him in her arms, but someone suddenly grabbed her from behind, pushing her into the alley and causing her to drop the child. In the chaos, she tried to protect him, but the assailant stepped on her hand and fled with the boy. By the time Kate finished her account, she was in tears, hugging Officer Barnes for support. He comforted her, and the captain stepped out of the room to give them space, placing a "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door. Now, the captain pondered how to track down the perpetrator. The following day, the precinct was bustling with activity as officers spoke with various individuals. A lieutenant even bumped into the captain, apologized, and hurried off to continue their work. "Lieutenant Wayne, what is going on here?" the captain questioned as he stopped the officer in his tracks. The lieutenant responded, explaining that there had been 4 more decapitations. The captain looked at him in surprise and asked for more details. The lieutenant informed him that 4 people had called in that day, reporting decapitated bodies with the heads nowhere to be found. The captain nodded and inquired if the higher-ups were aware of the situation, to which the lieutenant confirmed they were. The captain thanked him, and the lieutenant hurried off to speak with someone else. The captain sighed, troubled by the thought of how such horrific events could occur in his district. He walked to his office, sat down at his desk, and began tackling the new pile of paperwork awaiting him. Suddenly, an officer burst into the room, panic evident on his face. The captain's expression hardened as he stood up quickly. The officer informed him of a mass shooting at the 𝐼𝐻𝐻 Mall. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the captain rushed out of the room, the officer following closely behind. As they arrived at the scene, the captain witnessed chaos, with people fleeing the mall in terror. Some were standing still, while others were on the ground, and many had BLD on their clothes. He quickly issued orders. One group was to assist those outside, another to search inside for the perpetrator, and a third to help anyone still inside. By the end of the day, they had discovered at least 148 deceased individuals in the mall, with over 1,000 injured. They also apprehended the shooter, who turned out to be the same person responsible for the earlier decapitations. Unfortunately, the situation took a tragic turn when the suspect, cornered by the second team, took his own life before he could be taken into custody. It was a distressing sight, especially for the rookies present. The captain had the heartbreaking experience of trying to save a 𝐼𝐻𝐻𝐿 woman, only to have her pass away in his arms, leaving a profound impact on him. In the aftermath, the government decided to construct a memorial to honor all those who lost their lives that day, marking it as a devastating event that would linger in the memories of many for years to come. In another scene, Izuku reflected on the unexpected opportunity to choose their own code names, sharing a smile with Toga as they sat together. 𝐼𝐻𝐵 chuckled, leaning back in his chair, and Izuku felt a sense of camaraderie among them. As the PRD ended, the 5 friends stood up and exited the classroom, leaving their classmates puzzled. Kirishima called out, asking if they knew they only had 5 minutes before the next class. Izuku assured him they would return in time, and Kirishima seemed satisfied, disappearing back into the classroom. Izuku then wondered if Shigaraki was upset about their early departure, prompting a chuckle from him. Toga asked for directions to the restrooms, and Izuku pointed her way. She smiled and skipped off, while 𝐷𝐵 inquired about Izuku's home life. Izuku replied that he had 2 wonderful dads, a great brother, and an amazing boyfriend whom he loved dearly. 𝐷𝐵 smirked at his younger brother, and Toga returned just in time for them to head back to class as the 5-minute mark approached. Back in the classroom, they settled into their seats just as the bell rang and their teacher walked in. Izuku grabbed the headphones his dad used, prompting a loud protest from Toshi, who questioned why Izuku got to use them. Their teacher glanced at Izuku, recognizing the intensity of his glare, and explained that it was necessary due to Izuku's sensitivity to sound. The class resumed, and the atmosphere shifted back to normal. After classes, the group lingered for a moment, allowing others to leave the room. Hitoshi asked Aizawa what was happening next. Aizawa explained that everything would remain normal, except their house now had 3 extra rooms. Toga, overwhelmed with excitement, jumped onto Izuku's back, confirming that Aizawa was serious. Izuku laughed, shifting Toga comfortably. As Aizawa continued his explanation, Toga fell asleep on Izuku's back, while Todoroki held his hand. Hitoshi sat on the ground, and 𝐷𝐵 playfully urged him to get up. Hitoshi resisted, calling 𝐷𝐵 names, which prompted 𝐷𝐵 to take action. He lifted Hitoshi by the armpits and tossed him playfully into the air, causing him to land on 𝐷𝐵's shoulder. Hitoshi's head bumped against 𝐷𝐵's back, but he quickly adapted, going limp in a mock display of defeat. Izuku chuckled at the antics of his friends and siblings. Aizawa then announced it was time to head home, and the group nodded in agreement. Izuku, holding Todoroki's hand and ensuring Toga remained steady on his back, led the way out the door, with 𝐷𝐵, Hitoshi, and Aizawa following closely behind. As Izuku approached the house, he noticed how much larger it appeared compared to that morning. He chuckled, commenting on his father's words about the renovations. His father smirked and urged the group to go inside, playfully calling them problem children. Izuku stifled a laugh, careful not to wake Toga, who was still asleep. He sighed in relief and turned to Shoto, smiling as he took his hand. Shoto returned the smile, and they followed their father inside, where 𝐷𝐵 carried Toshi over his shoulder. Izuku mused to himself that 𝐷𝐵 seemed to have a soft spot for his brother, and he could tell Shoto shared the same thought. As they entered the new house, Izuku asked 𝐷𝐵 if Toshi was asleep, to which 𝐷𝐵 confirmed that he had dozed off halfway through their journey. Izuku smiled and waited for his father to show them their rooms, but when he glanced to the left, he found his father asleep on the couch. With a deadpan expression, he wandered off in search of a bedroom. After a few attempts, Izuku finally found a room for Toga. He gently laid her down on the bed and tucked her in, smiling at her before leaving to join Shoto in the room he had chosen for them. As expected, Shoto had picked the second largest room. Izuku beamed at him, sinking into the bed and marveling at its comfort. He exclaimed about how cozy it was, prompting Shoto to chuckle and wrap his arms around Izuku's waist, planting soft kisses on his head. Izuku snuggled into Shoto's chest, feeling relaxed, but then realized they were still in their school uniforms. He groaned, lamenting their attire, but when Shoto began to pull away, Izuku quickly wrapped his limbs around him, determined to keep him close. Shoto playfully suggested they should change out of their uniforms before Aizawa noticed the wrinkles. Izuku pouted, refusing to budge. Shoto teased him, suggesting he would enjoy helping with the clothes, which made Izuku's face turn bright red. Just as he was about to sit up, he felt Shoto's hand on his waist, causing him to mumble incoherently. Shoto continued to help him out of his uniform, and Izuku managed to voice a hesitant protest, feeling flustered. Shoto's smirk softened into a gentle smile, and he gave Izuku a quick peck on the cheek before heading toward the closet, only to remember they hadn't moved their belongings into the new house yet. Izuku sensed a playful thought crossing Shoto's mind, and his expression turned serious as he warned him against it. Shoto, undeterred, grinned and began to remove his own clothes. Izuku protested, insisting they wouldn't sleep in just their underwear, but it was futile as Shoto picked him up and carried him to the bed. The covers flew up, and Izuku found himself lying on his back, momentarily distracted by the sight before him. However, 𝗏𝗱 quickly joined him on the bed, wrapping his arm around Izuku's waist and pulling him close. Izuku felt the warmth of 𝗏𝗱's chest and the strength of his muscles, which stirred a mix of feelings within him. 𝗏𝗱 encouraged him to sleep, assuring him they could retrieve their belongings the next day. Izuku tensed but eventually relaxed, lulled by the steady rhythm of 𝗏𝗱's heartbeat as he buried his face in Izuku's hair. With that comforting presence, Izuku drifted off to sleep,